Story 1. My in-laws forced me to sign an absurd prenuptial agreement, but now they're begging me to break it because everything is mine. I always thought stories of controlling in-laws were exaggerations, something you saw in TV shows or online forums for entertainment. Then I met Julia's parents and understood that no, there are people who live to make your life complicated. But let's start from the beginning. I met Julia 6 years ago at a networking event. I had just launched my small business, more out of passion than any expectation of success, and she was working in marketing. We clicked right away. She was intelligent, funny, and beautiful, the whole package. Our relationship progressed quickly, and after 2 years together, I decided to propose. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the dinner where we announced our engagement to her parents. They had always treated me with a superficial kindness, the kind of courtesy that feels more like obligation than genuine affection. But that night was different. Their faces shifted from surprise to a barely disguised discomfort. That's where the comments began. "Are you sure you want to get married so young, Julia? Marriage is a big commitment. Have you considered all the implications?" What they were really saying, though they didn't say it openly that night, was that I wasn't good enough for their daughter. They came from an upper-class family, and well, not so much. My parents were humble workers, and my business was just taking off at that point. But I thought that, with time, I would earn a place in their hearts. Shortly after, Julia called me crying, telling me her parents had said they wouldn't approve of our wedding, at least not without a prenuptial agreement. According to them, it was to protect her, because you never know what can happen in the future. I'll be honest, at first I was deeply hurt. I felt like they were questioning my love for their daughter, as if all I wanted was her money, which was absurd because Julia didn't have a large fortune of her own. She lived in an apartment her parents paid for. But after thinking it over and talking with Julia, I agreed to sign it. What better way to prove I was with her for the right reasons, not for her money? The agreement was ridiculous, frankly. It stipulated that everything Julia owned before and after the marriage would be exclusively hers, and I would have no right to claim anything in the event of a divorce. On my part, everything I owned before or earned after would also be mine. But since I was just starting out at the time, they saw it as a fair deal. I don't know if it was pride, love, or naivete, but I signed without hesitation. Julia was grateful and told me this would only prove to her parents that I was the right man for her. During the first few years of our marriage, things were good. Julia decided to quit her job and focus on the home because, according to her, she wanted to enjoy married life without stress. I didn't mind. My business was starting to grow, and I didn't see a problem with carrying the expenses. I like to think we were a team. What no one saw coming, not even me, was the explosive success of my business. I started selling products online from my apartment, but within a couple of years, it became a nationally recognized company. I opened offices, hired staff, and by the time we reached our 5th anniversary, I was earning more money than I ever could have imagined. On the other hand, Julia was still not working. It didn't bother me because she was my wife, and it was never about who contributed more, but what did start to bother me was how her parents, who had never shown any interest in my business before, started to stick their noses in. Suddenly, their visits to our house became constant, and although at first they seemed casual, their comments soon turned uncomfortable. "With the success you're having, you should think about securing Julia's future. Don't you think it would be fair for her to have access to all this too? After all, she's your wife." Inside, I wanted to yell at them that I was already securing Julia's future. Everything I had was destined for her, without the need for papers or agreements. But for them, that wasn't enough. The irony of it all is that, thanks to the prenuptial agreement they themselves insisted I sign, Julia had no right to anything I had earned after we got married. That detail didn't seem to bother them when they thought I would be a failure, but now that the situation was different, things started to change. Update 1. When I signed the prenuptial agreement, I thought it would be the end of any financial discussions with Julia's parents. I never imagined that, years later, that same document would become the center of so much tension. To give you some context, after my business took off, our lives changed drastically. We went from living in a small rented apartment to buying a beautiful house in an exclusive area with a pool, a gym, and even a studio so Julia could have her own personal space. I didn't mind spending on amenities because I felt that everything I earned was also for her. At first, Her parents seemed delighted. Suddenly, I was no longer the humble boy who didn't deserve their daughter. Now I was the successful husband who proudly showed them the house and the new cars every time they came to visit. But, as expected, that attitude only lasted until they started questioning certain things. It all began at a family dinner at our house. We had prepared a special meal to celebrate Julia's birthday, and at one point during the evening, her mother made a seemingly harmless comment. "It's incredible everything you've achieved together. I'm sure Julia has a lot to do with your success." I didn't freeze. Not because I didn't want to acknowledge Julia. I've always believed that my success is also hers, but because the question had an insinuating tone, as if she wanted to say something more. I answered as diplomatically as possible. "Well, she has always supported me emotionally, and that means a lot." I thought that would be enough, but it wasn't. Her mother continued. Of course, but I mean, if it weren't for the stability she gave you, do you think you would have come this far?" That comment bothered me deeply because, although Julia had been a great emotional support at the beginning, she had not been involved in my business or our finances for years. I was the one working 12 hours a day, making important decisions, and taking all the risks. But I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and changed the subject. From that dinner on, I noticed a change in her parents. Visits to our house became more frequent, and the passive-aggressive comments started pouring in. "It's good that Julia found someone with vision. That ensures she'll never have to worry. I wish more men understood that the money isn't just theirs, but the family's." The worst came a few weeks later when Julia told me her mother wanted to talk to me privately. I was surprised, but I agreed. What followed was the most absurd conversation I've ever had in my life. Her mother began in a sweet tone, almost as if she were worried about me. "We know you're a hard-working and successful man, and we're very proud of everything you've achieved. But we're also worried that Julia isn't protected." The word protected sounded strange to me, so I asked her to clarify. Her answer left me speechless. "Well, with the prenuptial agreement, she technically doesn't have access to what you've earned. And although I'm sure nothing will ever happen between you two, it would be good if you reconsidered the clauses so that everything is more balanced." That's when I understood everything. They weren't worried about Julia. They were worried about the money. The same agreement they had forced me to sign was now the problem because it meant I had absolute control of our finances. I answered calmly, although inside I was furious. "I understand what you're saying, but that agreement was your idea, wasn't it? And I think Julia and I are fine as we are. I don't see the need to change it." Her smile disappeared immediately, and her tone shifted from kind to condescending. "It's not about you, dear. It's about Julia. She has sacrificed a lot for this marriage. It's only fair." Sacrificed. That word haunted me for days. What exactly had Julia sacrificed? She had chosen not to work. She had chosen to depend on me financially, something I never held against her. But now, according to her parents, she deserved something more because she was my wife. When I told Julia what her mother had said to me, I expected her to be on my side. Initially, she was. She assured me she didn't want to change the agreement and that her parents were just being protective. But over time, I noticed something. Every time her parents visited her or spoke to her on the phone, she seemed more distant, colder towards me. One night, after she returned from visiting her mother, she casually asked me, "Do you think my mom is right? I mean, wouldn't it be easier if we didn't have that agreement?" Update 2. I don't know if you've ever felt like you're losing control of your own life, as if someone else is pulling the strings behind everything. That's exactly how I felt during the months that followed that first conversation with my mother-in-law. Julia began mentioning the prenup more often, always in a casual tone, as if she were testing the waters. At first, I tried not to give it too much importance. I told myself it was just a passing issue, something that would disappear if I ignored it. But it didn't. One night, after dinner, Julia sat down with me in the living room and told me she wanted to have a serious conversation. That phrase immediately gave me a bad feeling. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about regarding the prenup," she began. I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "I think things were different when we signed it. You didn't have the success you have now, and I didn't know how much our lives were going to change. But now I feel like that agreement doesn't represent who we are as a couple. I'm not going to lie, those words hurt." What exactly did that mean? That our relationship was defined by a piece of paper? I tried to remain calm and asked her directly, What do you want to change, Julia? She hesitated a bit, but finally said it. I just want it to be fairer. Something that reflects that we're a team. Because we are, right? At that moment, I couldn't contain myself. Everything I had been holding back came pouring out. A team? Since when do you care about being a team, Julia? I was the one who worked day and night to get here. You decided to quit your job because you wanted to enjoy married life. I never held it against you. But now it turns out that all this time, I was the one making sacrifices, not you. She remained silent, as if she hadn't expected me to react that way. Then she said something that completely broke me. Does that mean you don't value what I've done for you? I wanted to yell at her that no, I didn't value the constant pressure from her parents, the passive-aggressive comments, and the fact that she had never tried to defend me from them. But instead, I just told her that I wasn't going to change the agreement. Of course, this didn't end there. Less than a week later, Julia organized a family meeting at our house with her parents. I found out they were coming a few hours before when Julia casually told me she wanted us to all talk together about our future. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Her mother wasted no time and threw the first punch. I don't understand why you're refusing to do something so simple, dear. Julia just wants what's best for both of you. I tried to remain composed, but her condescending tone was driving me crazy. I explained once again that I didn't see the need to change the prenuptial agreement because our lives didn't depend on it. Julia already had access to everything she needed, and I always made sure. Her father intervened, with that authoritarian air I had always hated. A man who doesn't protect his family isn't a man. This isn't just about money, it's about principles. Or do you have something to hide? That last sentence was the straw that broke the camel's back. I stood up from the table and told them I wasn't going to tolerate any more accusations. I reminded them that they themselves had insisted on that agreement, and that now, purely out of convenience, they wanted it to disappear. If you think I'm going to give in to your manipulations, you're wasting your time, I said. Julia looked at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. At that moment, I knew she was on their side, that we were no longer on the same side. After that night, things at home became tense. Julia stopped talking to me for days, and when she did, it was only to argue. The relationship we had built over the years seemed to be crumbling before my eyes. One day, I came home from work and found a note on the dining room table. Julia had gone to her parents' house to think things over. I wasn't surprised. In fact, part of me felt relieved. But I also knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Update 3. After Julia went to her parents' house, there was an uncomfortable silence in my life. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed, angry, or simply resigned. Deep down, I hoped this time to think would be her way of calming down and seeing things clearly. But no, I soon discovered that the time she needed was actually to plan her next move, along with her parents. A week after she left, Julia called me to ask me to meet her at a neutral cafe. Her tone was cold, almost professional, and I already knew this conversation wouldn't be good. Still, I went because part of me wanted to fix things, although I was no longer sure anything could be saved. When I arrived, Julia was already there waiting for me, with a folder on the table. It didn't take me long to figure out what it was about. She didn't waste time beating around the bush. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, and I think it's best if we resolve this once and for all. Here are the modifications to the prenuptial agreement that I believe would be fair to both of us. She handed me the folder, and when I opened it, I could hardly believe what I was reading. Basically, the document stated that the original agreement would be annulled and that all properties, income, and assets acquired during the marriage would be shared 50-50ths. In short, she wanted half of everything I had built. I tried to remain calm as I asked her, "Is this what you want? Is this your idea or your parents'?" Julia seemed offended by the question. "This is what I think is fair. They have nothing to do with this. I'm thinking about us, about our future." It was obvious she was lying. I could hear her mother's voice in every one of those words. I returned the folder and told her I wasn't going to sign anything. If this is the future you want, then there's nothing more to talk about. You can keep the original agreement or leave it as is. The conversation ended with Julia storming out of the cafe. But this was just the beginning. A few days later, I started receiving emails and messages from unknown numbers. Someone was spreading rumors about me, saying that I was manipulating Julia and that my success was thanks to her sacrifices. It was clear that they came from her inner circle, probably instigated by her parents. The most annoying thing was that they were trying to damage my professional reputation by sending these messages to some of my clients and employees. The lowest blow came when a former colleague sent me a screenshot of a social media post written by Julia's mother. It said something like, "It's sad to see how some people forget who was by their side when they had nothing. My daughter deserves much more respect and recognition for everything she's done for her husband. Family should always come first, but it seems some men only think of themselves." Although it didn't mention my name directly, it was clear she was talking about me. The post went viral in her social circle, and soon more uncomfortable questions and comments started coming in from acquaintances and friends. That's when I decided to hire a lawyer. I didn't want to get to this point, but it was clear I couldn't stand idly by while they tried to destroy me. I explained the situation to him, and he gave me simple but firm advice. Don't give an inch. If they want to play dirty, we'll play smarter. The first thing we did was reinforce the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Fortunately, it was impeccable from a legal standpoint, and there was no way to annul it without my consent. We also began to collect evidence of the defamation attempts by her family, which could become a legal case if they continued. Meanwhile, Julia kept sending me contradictory messages. One day she would tell me she loved me and wanted to fix things, and the next she would accuse me of being selfish for not giving in a little. It was as if she were trapped between her own desires and the pressure from her parents. Finally, a few months ago, I received a formal letter from a lawyer hired by Julia. In it, they requested a meeting to renegotiate the terms of the agreement and threatened to take the case to court if I didn't agree. This was ridiculous because the agreement was absolutely solid. What angered me the most was that the letter implied that Julia had contributed significantly to the success of my business, something we both knew wasn't true. At that moment, I stopped trying to understand or negotiate. I decided that if they wanted war, they would have it. My lawyer and I began to prepare a strategy, not only to defend myself, but also to expose all the lies and manipulations of her family. Update 4. When I received the letter from Julia's lawyers, I assumed it would be their most aggressive move, but no. It was just the beginning of their attack. Julia and her parents were determined to break me. After ignoring my initial refusal, her parents took a step that, frankly, seemed designed to intimidate me. They filed a lawsuit against me, claiming that Julia was entitled to fair compensation for the significant impact she had had on my business and our finances. This was a surprise because the prenuptial agreement had already been validated, and there was no way to break it without my consent. However, I quickly understood their tactic. They weren't looking to win the case, but to wear me down emotionally and financially through endless legal proceedings. Their plan was simple. They would suffocate me until I had no choice but to give in. My lawyer reassured me, telling me that their accusations were absurd and they had no evidence to support their case. But I was tired. My patience had reached its limit, and I was determined to hit back. It was during the preparation of my defense that something interesting came to light. My lawyer and his team began investigating Julia and her parents' financial situation to counter their accusations, and they discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Julia's parents were in serious financial trouble. Their family business, which had once been their pride, was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had debts with banks and suppliers, and apparently, they had been using the image of their perfect family to keep up appearances. This explained a lot. Her mother's constant comments about protecting Julia and their desperate attempts to access my money weren't out of love or concern, but because they were financially sinking. This wasn't all. Among the financial documents my lawyer reviewed, we found something even juicier. Julia's in-laws had tried to transfer properties into Julia's name a few months before she asked me to review the prenup. Basically, they were setting the stage to use her as an intermediary and protect their assets from possible seizures. At that moment, everything clicked. Julia wasn't the mastermind behind this situation. Her parents were using her to save themselves. I felt betrayed again, but this time with a mixture of pity for Julia. However, that didn't mean I was going to forgive anything. With this new information in hand, my lawyer proposed a plan. Countersue for defamation and emotional damages, using the evidence of the posts and rumors they had spread about me. Publicly expose her parents' financial situation, if necessary, to delegitimize their accusations that I was the selfish manipulator in the relationship. and used the evidence of the attempted property transfers to demonstrate that this was all a financial game on their family's part. While all of this was being prepared, Julia tried to approach me again. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced. She was crying, saying she didn't want things to get to this point and that she just wanted us to go back to how we were before. Part of me wanted to believe her, but her previous attitude and the influence of her parents didn't allow me to trust her. I answered frankly, "Julia, I don't know if this is really how you feel or if it's another one of your parents' strategies, but I can't keep living like this. If you really want to fix things, you need to distance yourself from them and show me that you're on my side. Otherwise, this ends here." She didn't say anything. She just left crying. I didn't know if her tears were genuine or part of the show, but it didn't matter anymore. I was determined to protect myself at all costs. Shortly after, her parents tried one last desperate move. They sent a proposal for an amicable agreement to avoid going to trial. Basically, they wanted me to give them a considerable sum of money in exchange for dropping the lawsuit. It was ridiculous if they thought I was going to give in after everything they had done. They couldn't be more wrong. I responded through my lawyer that not only was I rejecting their proposal, but I was also proceeding with my countersuit. Their silence after that was deafening. Now, with the hearing approaching, everything was about to explode, and I was ready to face whatever came. Final update. Well, here we are. The storm has finally passed, and the disaster Julia and her parents left behind was much bigger than I imagined. But you know what? For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Although the road to get here was anything but easy, the hearing was exactly the circus I expected. Julia's parents arrived with an air of superiority, as if they were sure their strategy was going to work. Julia, on the other hand, seemed completely out of place, almost as if she didn't want to be there. I suppose even she realized they had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. My lawyer did an impeccable job during the first part of the hearing. He dismantled each of the accusations against me, pointing out how the evidence they presented was vague and unfounded. But the real gem came when we presented our countersuit. First, we exposed the social media posts and the messages I had received, pointing out how they had tried to defame me to put emotional and social pressure on me. Then we brought to light Julia's parents' financial problems, including their attempts to transfer properties into her name. The judge was not impressed. In fact, he looked visibly annoyed with them. But the final blow was when we presented an email that Julia had sent to her mother months before asking me to renegotiate the prenup. In it, Julia said something like, "I'm not sure this is the right thing to do. I know he's never lacked anything for me, but I understand that we have to protect ourselves. I'll do what you ask, but I feel horrible about this." That email was devastating for them. It showed not only that it was all her parents' plan, but also that Julia wasn't acting independently. They tried to argue that the email was out of context, but it was too late. In the end, the judge completely dismissed their lawsuit and ruled in my favor on the countersuit. Not only did they have to cover all the legal costs, but they were also ordered to pay compensation for defamation. It was a resounding victory. After the trial, things quickly fell apart for them. The public exposure of their financial problems was a blow from which they couldn't recover. Their company ended up closing, and their properties were seized to pay their debts. Ironically, the same family that once looked down on me for not being good enough was now ruined, while I continued to thrive. Julia tried to contact me after the trial. She sent me a long message apologizing and saying that she had been manipulated by her parents. She said she still loved me and wanted to try again, but I didn't respond. For me, it was over. I sold the house we lived in together and moved to another city, far from everything that reminded me of that stage of my life. I blocked Julia and her family everywhere. I didn't want to give them another inch of my energy. Best of all, I used part of the compensation money I received to donate to a local charity that supports young entrepreneurs. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that in the end, it's not just about winning, but about making sure your victory means something bigger. It may not have been the most dramatic revenge, but seeing their perfect world crumble while I moved on with my life was more than enough for me. And that's it. After everything that happened, I'm fine. I'm better, in fact. Now I know that my worth doesn't depend on what others think of me, and I'll never allow anyone, no matter how close they are, to try to take away what I've built. A piece of advice for those who read this: protect what's yours. No matter how much you love someone, make sure your boundaries are clear and unwavering. If someone truly loves you, they won't try to cross them. Story 2. My dad demanded I reschedule my wedding because my brother had planned a vacation for the same weekend. My family has always had this somewhat complicated dynamic. My younger brother, let's call him David, has always been my dad's favorite. I know many say parents don't have favorites, but in my case, it's been obvious since we were kids. My dad treated him like he was special, unique, while I had to fight for his attention. David just had to exist. I remember in my teens, when I graduated high school with honors, my dad attended the ceremony, but spent most of the time talking to his friends about one of David's art projects. And when I got into college, my dad kept reminding me how David could have achieved that too, if he'd wanted to. David isn't a bad person, I want to make that clear. He's relaxed, charismatic, and genuinely nice. I don't blame him for how my dad treats him, but it hurts that he's never done anything to balance things out or acknowledge that. Often, I was left in the background. Now, with this dynamic in mind, I want to tell you about what happened with my wedding. My fiancée, Louise, and I had been planning for months. We set the date for a Saturday in October, a perfect month because it wasn't too hot and the venue we loved was available. We had booked a small but beautiful hacienda, intimate, just what we wanted. But then, one day, my dad called me to talk about a problem. "Honey, we have a small conflict with your wedding date," he said in that calm tone he uses when he wants to soften something absurd. Completely oblivious to what was coming, I asked what he was talking about. And then he dropped it on me. "Your brother planned a family vacation for that same weekend, and, well, we can't be in two places at once. I thought you could reschedule the wedding." I was speechless. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. How could he ask me something like that? It was my wedding, a date we had carefully chosen, adjusting everything to make it work, and now, suddenly, my dad wanted me to change it because David had decided to plan a trip. When I finally reacted, my first response was clear. I'm not changing my wedding because David planned a trip. He can move his vacation. My dad sighed as if I was the one being unreasonable. Look, it's not about one of us having to give in, but about all of us being together as a family. David already paid for the trip and there are a lot of people involved. It would be complicated to move everything now. You're still in time. That's when I realized my dad hadn't even talked to David about the situation. For him, the logical solution was for me to adjust my plans. I tried to stand my ground, but over the next few days the pressure became unbearable. My dad kept calling, and every time we talked, he'd drop comments like, "You know this isn't just for David? It's also so the whole family can be with you that day." And then came the emotional gems. "You don't want your wedding to be a divided event, do you? This is important for everyone." It was exhausting. I felt like I was being selfish for wanting to keep my original date. My mom, although not entirely in agreement, tried to mediate, saying it was best to avoid conflict. Even David sent me a message saying, "Hey, I don't want to cause you any problems. If Dad's insisting so much, maybe it would be easier to change it, but do what you want." And so, after much thought, I ended up giving in. I agreed to move my wedding. I had given in again, as if I were a little girl seeking my dad's approval and not an adult about to marry the love of her life. The most frustrating part was the chaos that followed. Changing the date wasn't as simple as my dad wanted to make it seem. The new date available at the venue we had booked was a few weeks later, but that meant reorganizing everything: vendors, invitations, confirmations, and, of course, paying a penalty for the change. Yes, moving the wedding not only cost me emotionally, but financially as well. My fiancée, Louise, was furious. "Why do you keep letting them treat you like this? It's our wedding, not a family dinner you can change whenever you want." And I understood him, truly. He was seeing from the outside a dynamic that I had normalized my whole life. But still, I felt trapped. I had always been the understanding daughter, the one who gave in so there wouldn't be any problems. I didn't want to be the cause of a major family conflict. I announced the date change as if it were my own decision, although everyone knew the truth. My immediate family knew the reason, but the rest of the guests received a simple message of adjustments and planning. And so, while I tried to justify the change, my dad couldn't be calmer. He called me a few days later and said, almost with a satisfied tone, "I knew you would understand. This shows you're mature and know how to prioritize family. I really appreciate it, truly." At that moment, my anger began to grow, not because of what he said exactly, but because he said it as if moving my wedding was a favor I owed him. David, on the other hand, barely commented. He sent me a message saying, "Thanks for moving it, sis. Dad told me. I hope it wasn't a problem for you." Not a call, not an, "I'm sorry for all this." Nothing. And the worst part was when I found out that the famous family vacation didn't even include everyone. My dad had given me the impression that it was a trip with the whole family, something that could justify his insistence. But no. It turned out to be a trip that David had organized with his friends and had only invited my dad to join. Not even my mom was included. This was the last straw. Moving my wedding wasn't about keeping the family together, as my dad had insisted. It was simply another demonstration that, when it came to David, everything else was secondary, including me. I told Luis what I had discovered, and his reaction was direct. "What more do you need to realize they don't care? You look the other way every time they do this to you. But why keep giving your all if they don't do the same?" And he was right. I had spent my whole life justifying my dad's favoritism towards David. I told myself that maybe it wasn't intentional, that it was something cultural, or that I was too sensitive. But at that moment, seeing how I had allowed this dynamic to affect one of the most important days of my life, something changed inside me. That's when I made the decision. I was going to get my wedding back. I called the hacienda and asked if the original weekend was still available. To my surprise, someone had recently canceled. So yes, the date was free, we could keep it. Luckily, my vendors were also available. And although I knew this was going to cause an earthquake in my family, I felt a strange calm in making the decision. I didn't tell anyone. My mom and dad still thought the wedding was on the new date, and I let them think that. I knew that if they found out, my dad would do everything possible to convince me to change it again, and I wasn't going to give in. I secretly reorganized everything. My fiancé, my friends, and my close relatives who knew the truth were completely in agreement. Nobody wanted to tell my parents. The day of my original wedding was approaching, and with each passing day, I felt more sure of my decision. How to explain this to them? It wasn't revenge, nor an act of childish rebellion. It was simply my way of saying, enough is enough. When the day arrived, I was ready for whatever came. I knew I wasn't going to come out of this unscathed, but for the first time in a long time, I was going to put myself first. Update 1. The day arrived, October, as we had originally planned. The day was perfect, not too warm or too cold, with that light breeze that seems to embrace you. Luis and I woke up excited, but also a little nervous because we knew that this wedding, although beautiful, was going to have family repercussions. The hacienda was decorated just as we had imagined, white flowers and soft green tones that contrasted with the rustic walls. Everything was intimate, surrounded only by the people who truly loved and supported us. The only one missing was my dad. Since I woke up that morning, I kept checking my phone, waiting for some sign that he had discovered the truth. I knew it wouldn't be long before he found out because my mom, who also wasn't invited on the famous trip with David, must have been wondering why there was no activity related to the wedding on the new date. The ceremony started on time. My best man, a beloved uncle, was the one who walked me down the aisle. He has always been like a father figure to me, someone who truly values me for who I am. As we walked together, I felt completely at peace. Luis was waiting for me at the end of the aisle with tears in his eyes, and suddenly, everything else ceased to matter. We got married surrounded by laughter, applause, and lots of love. It was perfect. For a moment I forgot about the family drama, David's vacation, and the favoritism that had always been present. It was just me, Luis, and a group of people who really wanted to celebrate with us. After the ceremony, while we were taking pictures with the guests, someone, I think it was my cousin, had the idea of taking a picture with my uncle walking me down the aisle. It was kind of a joke, a symbolic gesture to celebrate that he had taken on that role. But when I saw the picture on my phone, something made me stop. It was a mix of pride and defiance that led me to do what I did next. I sent the picture to my dad. Yes, it was impulsive. Yes, I knew I was adding fuel to the fire, but at that moment I didn't care. What I wrote to him was short and to the point. Everything turned out perfect. Someone else walked me down the aisle. I hope you're having a good time on your vacation. Almost instantly, my phone started ringing. My dad. I ignored the first call, and then the second. On the third, I decided to answer. The first thing I heard was his voice on the verge of despair. "What do you mean you already got married? What did you do?" His tone was a mix of disbelief and anger. I calmly explained that the wedding had taken place on the original date, that I wasn't going to keep adjusting my life to David's priorities, and that I was tired of always being the one who had to give in. He tried to justify himself, telling me that he didn't know that David's vacation was going to cause so much trouble, that he thought I agreed with the change, that it was all a misunderstanding. But his voice cracked when he repeated several times, "I should have been there. I'm your father. How could you not tell me?" And I simply replied, "You had the opportunity to be there. You chose not to come." The next thing I knew, my dad had left David's vacation in a hurry and was buying a plane ticket to get to my wedding. My mom called me to confirm it, telling me he was completely beside himself, repeating that he had made a terrible mistake and that he needed to get there before it was too late. Only it was too late. When my dad finally landed and arrived at the reception venue, most of the guests had already left. There were just a few of us left, chatting and enjoying the last moments of the day. He walked in with an expression of defeat that I had never seen on his face before. He approached me, trying to speak, but he didn't know where to begin. He just stood there, looking at me with red eyes, while I, calmly but firmly, said, "Dad, you always taught me that our actions have consequences. And this is the consequence of yours." I don't know how much of my words he actually processed at that moment. All I know is that, for the first time in my life, my dad seemed to realize how much it had hurt me to always be in second place. After my dad arrived at the reception, there was a moment of awkward silence. Most of the people who remained were watching us, trying to decide whether to intervene or just give us space. I wanted to stay calm, but the truth is I was tired. I had already cried all I had to cry in the days leading up to the wedding. That day, I didn't want tears or drama. I wanted peace, even though he had just barged in with all his emotional baggage. Luis stayed by my side, as always. He didn't say anything, but his presence was enough to give me strength. My dad asked to speak to me privately, so we stepped aside a bit, but I kept him close to where my husband was. I didn't want this to turn into an endless argument because, honestly, I didn't think my dad could say anything that would really change things. The first thing he did was try to apologize, but even his apologies sounded like excuses. "Daughter, I never wanted you to feel this way. I just wanted the family to be together. I didn't think this would escalate so much." That's when I couldn't contain myself anymore. For the first time, I told him everything I had kept inside for years. "Dad, do you know what hurts most about all this? That it wasn't even a surprise. I knew you were going to ask me to change my wedding for David, because that's always been the story of my life. He's always been your priority, and I've always had to adapt. But this wasn't just any event, it was my wedding, and you still thought I could wait. Do you know what that tells me? That to you, I'll never be enough." My voice was trembling, but I wasn't shouting. I didn't want to. I wanted him to understand. My dad tried to interrupt me, but I didn't let him. "I've always tried to justify you, to think that maybe I was too sensitive, that you didn't realize what you were doing. But this was too much. Why didn't you ask David to change his vacation? Why was it so easy to come to me with that demand, as if I were the one who had to adjust? Because you know I always have. But not anymore." He was silent. I saw him open his mouth a couple of times as if he were searching for the right words, but he didn't find any. Finally, he lowered his head and murmured, "You're right." Hearing those words should have given me some satisfaction, but all I felt was weariness. My dad was finally admitting he had been wrong, but it was too late to fix what had happened. I told him I needed time, that I didn't know what our relationship would be like in the future, but that right now I couldn't keep acting as if everything was okay. My dad tried to hug me, but I backed away, not because I didn't want to, but because I felt I needed to protect my space, my peace of mind. My mom also called that night, worried because my dad hadn't returned to the hotel. I explained what had happened, and although she tried to mediate, this time I told her I didn't want to hear any more excuses. "Mom, it's not just this time. This is a pattern, and you've allowed it too. I need distance from both of you." It was hard to say, but necessary. For years I had normalized this behavior because no one in my family had said anything. Everyone turned a blind eye to the favoritism towards David, even my mom, who had always been more neutral, but had never intervened to truly support me. The next day, my dad tried to stay longer in the city, but I asked him to leave. Not angrily, but clearly. I needed time to enjoy my new life with Luis without family drama. David, for his part, sent me a message that left me more confused than anything else. "Hey, Dad told me what happened. I didn't mean to cause any problems, okay? I didn't know it was going to be so important to you. I hope we can talk soon. I read the message several times before deciding not to reply. Not because I wanted to cut off contact with him, but because I realized something. David didn't understand, had never understood what it meant to be the constant center of our dad's attention, nor how it had affected me. To him, all of this probably seemed like an overreaction. Luis and I decided not to go on our honeymoon immediately, but we spent a few quiet days disconnected from everything. It was during those days that I really began to process what had happened. My relationship with my dad will never be the same. I'm no longer the daughter seeking his approval, and that's going to be hard for him to accept. With David, I'm not sure. For now, I need space. One thing I'm sure of, my wedding day was perfect because I finally chose myself. And although it wasn't easy, it was the first step in freeing myself from a family dynamic that had hurt me for years. Update 2. I thought the drama was over after the wedding, but I was wrong. What happened in the following days was the final straw that led me to make a definitive decision regarding my dad. A couple of days after the wedding, I received a call from my uncle, the same one who had walked me down the aisle. His voice was tense, and what he told me left me stunned. Your dad came looking for me. He berated me for walking you down the aisle. Things got ugly. At first, I didn't quite understand, but when my uncle explained, I felt a mix of shame, anger, and sadness. It turns out that my dad had confronted him directly, accusing him of interfering in family matters and stealing the place that belonged to him as a father. My uncle, who has always been a patient and calm man, tried to reason with him, but my dad was in no condition to listen. According to my uncle, the conflict escalated quickly. My dad, blinded by frustration and probably guilt, started yelling at him, saying things like, "You had no right to be there. That was my daughter and my moment." My uncle replied with something that moved me deeply. "You gave up that moment yourself when you asked her to move her wedding. I was just there to support her when you didn't want to." And then the unexpected happened. My dad tried to hit him. My uncle, being much bigger and stronger than my dad, easily stopped him, but not before making something clear. "If you ever cross that line again, there will be no turning back. Learn to respect your daughter and the people who truly love her." When my uncle told me this, I felt mortified. My wedding, which had been such a beautiful moment, had become an excuse for my dad to continue causing problems and hurting the people I care about. I called my dad immediately to confront him. At first, he denied what had happened, saying my uncle was exaggerating, but when I insisted, he ended up admitting it. What I could gather: "Dad, I've tried my whole life to understand you, justify you, even excuse you. But what you did to my uncle shows that this isn't just about favoritism or a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of selfishness that I'm no longer willing to tolerate. I love my family, but I can't continue allowing you to be a negative presence in my life." He tried to interrupt me, but I continued. "As of today, I don't want any contact with you. I need peace, and I'm not going to achieve that if you remain in my life. Maybe someday things will change, but for now this is my decision." What followed was a series of excuses and pleas, but I had already made up my mind. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the best thing for me. I ended the call feeling relieved, although also heartbroken. No one wants to cut off their relationship with a parent, but sometimes it's the only option to protect your well-being. My mom tried to mediate, as always, telling me I was overreacting and that I should forgive him because family always comes first. But I gave her the same answer. Family is no excuse for allowing emotional abuse. I'm not obligated to stay where I'm not valued. Since then, I've maintained my decision. My dad has tried to contact me a couple of times, sending messages ranging from belated apologies to attempts at emotional manipulation, but I haven't responded. David, for his part, has remained distant. I don't know if he really understood the weight of what happened or if he simply decided not to get involved. In the end, I don't feel the need to seek his approval either. As for my uncle, we remain very close after all this. I thanked him from the bottom of my heart for being there for me, not just at the wedding, but throughout my life. I told him I was sorry that my dad had put him in that situation, but he, with his usual calmness, replied, "I'd do it 1,000 times over if it means you're happy." Sometimes it hurts to think that I've lost my relationship with my dad, but then I remember that it was never really an equal relationship. I was always the one who gave, who yielded, who sacrificed. And although I hope that someday he can reflect and change, I'm not going to wait for him. Now I'm focused on my life with Luis, on building a family based on love and mutual respect. My wedding was a turning point in my life, not only because I married the man I love, but because I learned to put myself first. Story 3. My wife and I divorced. She took custody of my children and now wants me to give her 80% of my salary. I was married to my ex-wife, Laura, for 10 years. We have 2 wonderful children, Emma, who is 8 years old and the most creative and sweet girl in the world, and Lucas, who at 6 years old already shows signs of being a little genius who loves dinosaurs. A few months ago, my world fell apart. Laura was cheating on me with a guy she met at work, Mike. I found out by accident. She left her email open on our computer, and there were the messages. They weren't ambiguous. They were full of plans to run away together, mocking me. What hurt me the most, talking about how they could get the kids used to him. I'm not an explosive person. I never have been. But that day my hands were shaking as I confronted Laura. She didn't deny anything. In fact, she admitted it with a coldness that still haunts me. According to her, our marriage was already dead, and this was just the proof. I decided to get a divorce. I thought things couldn't get any worse, but I was wrong. During the divorce process, Laura fought tooth and nail for full custody of our children. Her main argument was that I worked a lot and therefore didn't have time for them. And you know what? The system believed her. Now I'm trapped in an absurd situation. Laura has custody of Emma and Lucas, while I have to pay her a huge amount in child support. To top it all off, she's requesting a review of the agreement to keep 80% of my salary, and I know that money isn't going to my children. My children have started acting differently. When I see them on weekends, they come in worn clothes, they seem more withdrawn, and sometimes they say things that leave me speechless, like Mike got very angry the other day, or that Mom and Mike argued again. I don't want to put them in the middle of all this, but it's killing me to see them like this. And meanwhile, Laura continues living the high life with Mike. They go on trips, eat at expensive restaurants, and even bought a new motorcycle. All this while my children seem to be increasingly neglected. I'm trying to stay calm. I'm doing what I can to keep my relationship with my children intact, but I feel like I'm losing this battle, and it's consuming me. Update 1. Things have gone from bad to worse since I shared what was happening. My ex keeps demanding more money for the kids, but it's clear that most of that money isn't reaching them. A few weeks ago, Emma asked me for a new sweater because she was cold. This seemed strange to me because we are in the middle of winter and I bought enough clothes for them just a few months ago. I asked what happened to the clothes I bought them, and my daughter, in her innocence, told me. Mom says there is no money because Mike had to fix his motorcycle. That was a low blow. I decided to start paying attention to the small details. Every weekend they came to visit me. I noticed things. Old backpacks, worn shoes, and sometimes casual comments from the children about how they ate bread with something because Mike didn't leave money for dinner. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything pointed to the fact that the money I was sending, supposedly for Emma and Lucas' support, was being used to maintain Laura and her boyfriend's lifestyle. I made a decision. If I wanted any chance of improving this situation, I needed concrete proof. Suspicions or my children's words weren't enough. So, after much thought, I hired a private investigator. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, because I felt like a traitor, but I also knew it was necessary. The investigator didn't take long to bring me results. He checked Laura and Mike's social media, and, as if they were reckless, they had left everything in public view. They posted photos of dinners at expensive restaurants, getaways to luxury hotels, and even a video of Mike showing off his new motorcycle with the caption, "Finally something worthy of me." The most frustrating thing is that this wasn't a casual oversight. Laura was actively financing her relationship with Mike, and she was doing it with the money I was sending. But that wasn't the only thing I found. The investigator also informed me of something much more worrisome. Mike wasn't exactly a model citizen. Apparently, he had a history of domestic violence in the past. He had had legal problems for hitting a previous partner, although the case didn't go any further because she dropped the charges. He also had some fines for driving under the influence of alcohol. The fact that this man was close to my children, that he spent so much time with them, was something I couldn't ignore. Emma and Lucas are everything to me, and the idea of them being exposed to someone like that was driving me crazy. I took all this information to my lawyer. He told me that while the evidence of the expenses could be used to question how Laura was using the money, the really strong thing was Mike's record. According to him, if we managed to prove that the environment in which my children live is not safe, we could request a custody review. For now, I'm gathering all the evidence I can. I'm not going to act impulsively because I know that if I make a mistake, Laura can use it against me. But every day that passes, I feel that my children are in more danger, and that takes away my sleep. I've tried to talk to Laura, to reason with her. I told her that all I want is for Emma and Lucas to be okay, but all I got was a sarcastic laugh and a comment that I'm an obsessive control freak. I don't know how someone can put their children second, but here I am, fighting the selfishness of a person I once loved. Update 2. I don't know how to start this without feeling a lump in my throat. The situation with my children is worse than I imagined, and every day that passes I wonder how I didn't see the signs before. The investigator I hired continued working on gathering information. Meanwhile, I began to notice alarming changes in Emma and Lucas' behavior. Every time they came to visit me, my daughter, who used to be so cheerful, now seems quieter, as if she's afraid to say something wrong. And Lucas, God, it breaks my heart. He's a child who has never complained about anything. But these days he has moments where he just stares at the floor as if he's disconnected from the world. The trigger was a conversation with Emma. I noticed she was especially tense one afternoon while we were playing in the park. I encouraged her to talk, telling her that she can always trust me, and after a moment of silence, she let out something that chilled me to the bone. Dad, Mike got very angry the other day. He yelled so loud he broke a door. I tried to stay calm so as not to scare her more, but my hands started to shake. I asked her what had happened, and she told me that Mike and Mom had had a very bad argument. Mike got so angry that he hit the bathroom door until it broke. Emma tried to downplay it, saying that they calmed down later and that Mom said everything was fine, but I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. That same night, I called the investigator and asked him to prioritize any information about Mike's behavior at home. I needed to know more about what was going on when I wasn't there. What I discovered was devastating. Not only does Mike have a history of domestic violence, he also seems to have current problems with alcohol. The investigator spoke with some neighbors, who confirmed that they had heard intense arguments coming from Laura's house, especially at night. One neighbor even mentioned that she once heard Mike yell something like, "I don't care what you think. These are my rules here." But there's something else that haunts me. According to the children, Mike is the one who disciplines in the house. Emma told me that once Lucas spilled a glass of juice on the table, and Mike sent him to his room without dinner. My son is 6 years old. What kind of adult does that? Every time I think about my children alone in that house with that man, I feel powerless. I'm documenting everything they say, every detail. I don't want my children to feel like I'm interrogating them, so I try to do it casually, but it's hard to hear these things and not let the pain show. My lawyer has told me that all of this strengthens the case, but we still need more. We need evidence that shows that this environment isn't safe for the children, and that's why we are moving forward with the plan to file a motion to review custody. Meanwhile, the small signs keep appearing. Emma told me that Mike has a friend who sometimes stays at the house. She called him the man who always sleeps on the couch. When I asked how she felt about it, she lowered her voice and said, "It's weird, Dad. I don't like it when he's there." Lucas also mentioned that this friend smells weird. And although he didn't say more, I have an idea of what could be happening. This isn't just negligence, it's putting my children in a potentially dangerous situation, and I'm not going to allow it. As if that weren't enough, Laura continues to act as if everything is fine. She sends me cold and distant messages, almost always asking for more money for urgent things, but never explains exactly what it will be spent on. Not once has she mentioned the changes in Emma and Lucas' behavior or the arguments with Mike. Next week is crucial. We are going to file the motion and request a more thorough investigation of the home. I'm nervous because I know Laura is going to fight with everything she has, but I'm not going to give up. Every day that passes, I feel like my children are further away from being safe, and I can't go on like this. Update 3. We finally filed the motion for a custody review. And although I felt a momentary relief knowing that we were moving forward, I wasn't prepared for the level of confrontation this would bring. Laura is furious, and she hasn't hesitated to throw all kinds of accusations against me to defend herself. The preliminary hearing was chaos from the beginning. Laura arrived with her lawyer, and from the moment they entered the room, Their attitude was one of complete hostility. As soon as they sat down, her lawyer began with a direct attack. They accused me of being an absent father, of being motivated solely by revenge, and, what hurt me the most, of manipulating my children into speaking ill of her and Mike. It was clear that Laura was willing to do anything to discredit me, even if it meant distorting reality. I tried to remain calm while listening to her lies, but what really sustained me was knowing that I had something she didn't: the truth and the evidence. My lawyer presented all the evidence we had gathered. We started with the photos and social media posts of Laura and Mike, lavish dinners, trips, and that motorcycle they showed off as if they were irresponsible teenagers. Then we moved on to Mike's background. The judge reviewed the documentation, which included his history of domestic violence and drunk driving fines. I could see in her expression that this had caught her attention. However, what really changed the tone of the hearing was the testimony. We presented statements from neighbors who confirmed having heard constant shouting and arguments in the house. One neighbor even testified that she had called the police once because she thought something bad was happening, although Laura and Mike managed to calm the situation down before it escalated. But the most heartbreaking thing was the evidence about how my children were feeling. My lawyer presented a report from Emma's teacher, who had noticed significant changes in her behavior. She was more withdrawn in class and had difficulty concentrating. We also included notes from a child therapist I took the children to a few weeks ago. He noted that Lucas was showing signs of stress, something that is not common in a child his age. When all of this came to light, Laura tried to defend herself. She said that Mike wasn't perfect, but that he was trying to improve, and that his background wasn't relevant because it was years ago. She also claimed that the photos and posts were normal things for a couple, and that they didn't prove anything. But then my lawyer dropped the bomb: an audio recording that the private investigator had obtained of a particularly heated argument between Laura and Mike. In the recording, you could hear Mike yelling threats, saying that he was fed up with the children and that if they didn't respect him, they were going to find out. The room fell completely silent as the audio played. Even Laura seemed surprised, as if she didn't know it had been captured. After hearing that, the judge ordered a thorough evaluation of Laura's home. In the meantime, temporary custody was granted to me. When I heard those words, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. I couldn't help but look at Laura, who was red with rage, murmuring something to her lawyer. That night, Emma and Lucas came back with me, and although they are still processing everything, they already look calmer. Emma even told me, "You know, Dad, I like it when we're here. It's quieter." That almost made me cry. I know this isn't over yet. The home evaluation will be the next step, and I'm sure Laura won't give up so easily. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm gaining ground. My children are finally in a safe place, and I will do everything in my power to make sure they never have to go back to that house with Mike. Update 4. It's been exhausting weeks, but we are getting to the most crucial part of all this. The evaluation of Laura and Mike's home has been completed, and although I had an idea of what to expect, reading the report was a mix of relief and rage. The evaluator was thorough. He spent several days visiting Laura's home, interviewing the neighbors, and, most importantly, talking to the children. He also had individual meetings with Laura and Mike, and I think they underestimated how much would be discovered. The report confirmed what I already feared. The environment in that house is absolutely toxic for my children. Here are some of the key points it included. Constant conflicts. Both Laura and Mike admitted they argue frequently. Although they tried to minimize it by saying they are normal couple things, the neighbors' statements painted a different story. According to them, the yelling is so loud that sometimes it seems like threats. Neglect of the children. The evaluator noted that the house was not in optimal condition. Emma and Lucas' rooms were messy and lacked basic necessities, such as appropriate clothing and toys in good condition. Apparently, Mike has strict rules about keeping the house clean, but his definition of clean seems to be that the children don't touch anything. Mike's behavioral problems. This was the most shocking. In his interview, Mike lost his temper with the evaluator. According to the report, he raised his voice and had an aggressive tone when asked about his relationship with the children. Apparently, he even said, "I don't understand why they make such a fuss. Sometimes children need a firm hand." That phrase was written in the report, and I honestly can't believe he sunk himself that way. Alcohol and inappropriate friends. The evaluator also mentioned that he detected a strong smell of alcohol in the living room during one of his visits. In addition, he confirmed that the famous friend who sleeps on the couch is an acquaintance of Mike who has a criminal record for drug possession. That man has spent several nights in the house while my children were there. When I read all this, my first reaction was to scream. How could Laura allow this man and his environment to become the home of our children? How could she justify all this while accusing me of being a bad father? My lawyer explained that this report is a key piece to consolidate full custody. We are no longer talking about just mismanagement of money. This is a matter of safety. There is no way anyone can justify that this environment is appropriate for raising two young children. Of course, Laura reacted in the worst possible way when she found out that the report was going to be used in the next hearing. She called me directly, something she hadn't done in months. Her tone was a mix of anger and desperation. She accused me of ruining her life and of being a controlling maniac. According to her, all of this was my fault because I couldn't accept that she was moving on with her life. I didn't let myself get carried away by her attitude. Staying calm has been my strategy from the beginning, and I don't plan to change that now. I simply told her, all of this is for Emma and Lucas. If you really think that this environment is good for them, then you're not seeing them as your children, but as an excuse to justify your decisions. After that, she hung up. I know Laura is upset because this report also exposes Mike. Apparently, he is furious because he feels that I have persecuted him without reason. But the truth is, I don't need to look for reasons to protect my children from someone like him. The next hearing is in a few days, and my lawyer is optimistic. The judge has in his possession the full report, the recordings, the neighbors' testimonies, and the statements from the children's therapist. Laura will have to explain how she plans to defend her case against all this evidence, and I honestly don't think she can. For now, Emma and Lucas are still with me, and every day they feel more comfortable. Emma smiled again in a way I haven't seen in months, and Lucas doesn't seem so withdrawn anymore. Today he even told me that he wanted to decorate his room with dinosaur posters, and that simple phrase gave me so much hope. I'm preparing for what's to come, but now more than ever I'm clear that I'm doing the right thing. My children are the most important thing in my life, and I'm not going to stop until I make sure they are safe. I will soon update with what happens at the hearing. I'm nervous, but also determined. Final update. Today was the most important hearing of my life. I knew the judge would make a crucial decision about Emma and Lucas' custody, but I never imagined the events would take the dramatic turn that I witnessed. I entered the courtroom with my heart in my throat. My lawyer was confident, but I couldn't help but feel nervous. Despite all the evidence we had gathered, there's always that little voice that reminds you that things don't always go as planned. Laura and Mike arrived together, but there was no doubt that something wasn't right between them. They barely spoke to each other, and Mike seemed more aggressive than usual, pacing back and forth in the waiting room before we were called in. It was clear that he wasn't used to anyone questioning his behavior. When the hearing began, my lawyer presented the final arguments. He spoke of the overwhelming evidence of the toxic environment in Laura's house, including the evaluator's report, the audio recordings, the neighbors' testimonies, and Mike's history. Everything was there, irrefutably documented. Laura's lawyer tried to discredit everything, but his arguments were weak. He said that I was obsessed with destroying Laura's happiness, and that Mike had changed since his past mistakes. However, the judge didn't seem impressed. Every time Laura's lawyer spoke, the judge glanced at the evaluator's report as if remembering why we were there. Finally, the moment of the verdict arrived. The judge spoke calmly, but each word was like a hammer hitting a nail. She said that the children's well-being was the absolute priority and that the evidence clearly showed that the environment in Laura's home wasn't safe for them. Then, she ruled that I would get full custody of Emma and Lucas, while Laura would have supervised visits until she could demonstrate that her situation had improved. It was as if all the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked at my lawyer, and he gave me a brief smile as if to say, "We did it." But the calm didn't last long. Mike suddenly stood up and started yelling. "This is a joke. That idiot doesn't deserve to have the children." His voice echoed throughout the room, and the judge banged her gavel, demanding silence. But Mike didn't stop. He turned to me with eyes full of rage, and before I could react, he ran towards me, hurling insults. "You ruined everything. You're a damn coward." He tried to hit me, but the security guards intervened just in time, restraining him while he continued yelling like a madman. "This isn't over. You and those brats are going to pay me," he yelled as the guards immobilized him. Laura was paralyzed, completely white. She didn't even try to defend him. The judge ordered Mike to be removed from the courtroom immediately. As they took him out, he continued to hurl threats and insults at me. In the end, the guards arrested him for contempt of court and attempted assault. It was a surreal moment, but I also felt a strange satisfaction seeing him finally face the consequences of his actions. After that, the judge addressed Laura. Her tone was stern, but still calm. She made it clear that her relationship with Mike had put the children in danger and that if she ever wanted to regain even a fraction of custody, she would have to demonstrate that she was willing to prioritize Emma and Lucas' well-being above all else. Laura could barely respond. She was completely defeated. When it was all over, I left the courtroom with Emma and Lucas on my mind. I couldn't wait to get home, hug them, and tell them that from now on everything would be okay. That night, while we were having dinner together, Emma looked at me and said, "So we don't have to go back with Mike anymore?" I assured her we didn't. There was a peace in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months. Lucas hugged me before going to sleep, something he hadn't done in a long time. This chapter has finally ended, but I know the work doesn't end here. My children have emotional wounds that will take time to heal, but I'm here for them. I always will be. Laura is still the mother of my children, and I'm not going to deny them the opportunity to have a relationship with her if she shows that she can change. But for now, I have something I haven't had in a long time: peace. For those who have followed this story, thank you for your words of encouragement and support. Sometimes, in the darkest moments, that was the only thing that gave me strength. Now I can look ahead and focus on what's most important: giving my children the life they deserve. Story 4. My brothers always humiliated me for being the poor one, but now they work for my company and beg for mercy. They say that family is the most important thing, but in my case, that was never true. I grew up in a family where it felt like there was an invisible sign stuck to my forehead that read, "The least important." We were 4 siblings, 3 older than me, all brilliant in their own way, or so they were told. And then there was me, the leftover. For as long as I can remember, my brothers did everything they could to remind me that I wasn't on their level, that my place was to be the poor one of the group. My parents weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. Well, they weren't. My dad had a good family business that was doing well, and my mom always made sure there was nothing lacking at home, except for me. My older brothers had new bicycles, brand-name clothes, the latest video game consoles. I, on the other hand, inherited what they no longer wanted. My first bicycle had worn-out paint and broken brakes. My clothes were always too big for me, and the video games, well, I could only watch as they played. Since I was a little girl, I understood that there was a hierarchy at home. My oldest brother was the absolute favorite. If he did something well, it was celebrated with great fanfare. If he made a mistake, "We're all human, son. Don't worry." The second brother was the joker, the life of the party, and the third was the sports prodigy. And me? I was the good-for-nothing. Even when I tried my hardest, it was never enough. I remember one time in elementary school, when I won a drawing contest, my mom barely mentioned it, while my older brother had received a trophy for a soccer game, and there was a special dinner to celebrate. My drawing ended up tucked away in a drawer. But the worst part wasn't my parents' favoritism, no. The worst part was my brothers. They made my life hell. They used that difference in treatment as a weapon, always reminding me that I wasn't on their level. They called me freeloader, burden, or their favorite, the poor one. When we had visitors, they made me look like the useless one in the family. "Don't ask him for help, he'll surely mess it up," they'd say between laughs. I tried to defend myself, but the more I did, the more they mocked me. And the worst thing is that my parents never stopped them. For them, that's just how brothers are. There was a moment that marked a before and after for me. It was my senior year of high school, and I was offered the chance to apply for a full scholarship to a major university. I was excited. For the first time, I saw a way out, something that would allow me to escape that environment and build something of my own. I told my family, and instead of support, I received mockery. My older brother said, "Why are you even applying? They'll surely reject you." But the worst came later. The day of my interview, someone accidentally took the papers I needed and used them to light the grill at a family barbecue. That's when I understood that I didn't have a place in that house. I couldn't stay there any longer, being the target of their humiliation. I left without money, without a plan, but with a determination I had never felt before. And that was the last time I allowed them to make me feel less than. Although, of course, I never imagined how things would change in the future. Update 1. When I left home, there was no master plan behind my decision. I didn't have a roadmap or a clear idea of how I was going to survive. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay a second longer in that place where I was always the target of mockery. I left with what I was wearing, a couple of changes of clothes, and 200 pesos I had saved from odd jobs I did on weekends. It wasn't much, but at that moment, all I wanted was to escape, no matter how. The trip to another city was by bus. I remember sitting by the window, watching the landscapes go by as I tried to hold back the tears. It wasn't sadness about leaving, but a mixture of anger and a kind of desperate relief. In my head, a voice kept repeating, "This can't be your life. You can do more than this." But, on the other hand, there was also fear. What was I going to do? Where was I going to go? I arrived in a medium-sized city, far enough away that my family couldn't easily track me down, but not so big that I would get lost in anonymity. At first, I looked for a shelter to stay in, but I soon realized that those places were so precarious that I wouldn't last. I had to find a job, and fast. My first job was washing dishes in a small restaurant. It wasn't glamorous or well-paid, but at least it allowed me to eat once a day and save the little I had left after paying for a tiny room I rented in a boarding house. It was nothing more than an old mattress and a broken window, but for the first time in my life, I felt that the space was mine. There, nobody yelled at me, nobody humiliated me. Things weren't easy. There were days when I barely had the energy to get up. Between work and the few hours of sleep I managed to get on that uncomfortable mattress, I felt like my body was at its limit. But something inside me told me I couldn't give up. So I enrolled in night school. I had to finish high school if I wanted to even aspire to something better. It was at that school that I met Hugo, someone who would change my life. Hugo was a classmate who also worked during the day and studied at night. We became friends quickly because we shared a similar philosophy. We both wanted more out of life, something that nobody was going to give us. With him, I learned not only to work hard, but also to think big. Hugo introduced me to the idea of business. He had an uncle who sold merchandise at a market, and he taught me that if we could scrape together some money, we could start something small. For months, I saved every last cent possible. I washed more dishes than I can count. I gave up minimal luxuries like drinking coffee or using public transportation. If I could walk, I did. With those savings, and some that Hugo had also saved, we bought our first batch of products. It wasn't anything impressive, just a handful of cell phone chargers and some cheap accessories, but it was enough to take the first step. We sold them at the market on weekends, and little by little, we started to see profits. Meanwhile, I never heard from my family again. Well, not directly. Sometimes I would hear things from acquaintances who still lived in my hometown. I knew that my brothers continued with their perfect lives. The oldest with a good job, the second with a family, and the third, well, he was still the star athlete, although now he played in local leagues. The funny thing is that, despite not hearing from them, there was something that kept motivating me, to prove them wrong about me. Every time I felt on the verge of exhaustion, I thought of them, how they laughed at me, how they burned my application papers for that scholarship. Those memories, instead of destroying me, gave me strength. And it was that determination that allowed Hugo and me to go from the market to having a small shop, and later, with more effort, we opened a second one. Things were starting to change, and although I was still far from achieving what I really wanted, for the first time, I felt that the world was a place where I had a chance. The small business that Hugo and I started with cell phone chargers and cheap accessories didn't just grow, it exploded. As we better understood what our customers were looking for, we began to diversify our products. Soon we stopped selling just accessories and entered the world of technology, headphones, smartwatches, and later, refurbished devices. We became specialists in finding merchandise at a good price and giving it a fair profit margin. What initially was a small stand in the market became a stable shop, and then two. Before we knew it, we had a small but solid chain. We both worked like crazy, but all that effort began to pay off. We could pay employees to take care of the stores while we. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something that was mine, something that nobody could take away from me. Over time, Hugo and I became more professional. We decided to register our company, work with wholesalers, and start selling online. It was a learning curve, but we remained constant. Eventually, we opened a small office where we managed inventory and digital orders. It was there, in that office, that I received a message I wasn't expecting. It was from my oldest brother. Years had passed since I left home, and during all that time, I never made the effort to look for them or contact them again. My thinking was simple. If they never cared about me when I lived under the same roof, why should I care now that I was finally free of them? But there was his message on my phone. It said something like, "Hi, how are you? I know we haven't talked in a long time, but I wanted to know if you could help me with some money. I'm going through a difficult time." I read the message 3 times. At first, I couldn't believe it. This was the same brother who used to make fun of me for not having money to buy an ice cream when I was a child. The one who said I would never amount to anything because I didn't have character. And now there he was, asking me for help. My first reaction was to ignore him. Why would I help someone who treated me like I was worthless throughout my entire childhood? But curiosity got the better of me. I didn't reply, but I started asking about him to acquaintances from our hometown. What I discovered left me with a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. It turned out that my older brother had lost his job at a company where he had been for years. He was fired for a serious mistake, something related to mismanagement of resources. Then, in an attempt to regain his stability, he invested all his savings in a business that failed in less than a year. Now he was up to his neck in debt and had no idea how to get out. On the other hand, my other 2 brothers weren't doing so well either. The second brother, the joker of the family, had had problems in his marriage and was going through a divorce that left him with practically nothing. The third, the athlete, suffered an injury that left him out of the leagues where he played, and now he was working a low-profile job to support himself. It was ironic. For years they had seen me as the poor one, the loser of the family, and now, while I was moving forward in my life, they were struggling to stay afloat. I didn't reply to that first message, nor the second, nor the third, but more started arriving. Not just from my oldest brother, but also from the other 2. They all had something in common: desperation. "Brother, I know we've had our differences, but I need your help. Or, please, if you can lend me something, I'll pay you back as soon as I can." I won't deny it. There was a part of me that enjoyed the irony. It was as if life was teaching them a lesson. But I wasn't ready to act yet. I knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, something they couldn't yet imagine. Update 2. Over time, the messages from my brothers stopped being sporadic. It seemed that fate had decided to spin the wheel completely, and now they were in the position they once attributed to me. Desperate, without resources, looking for help wherever possible. My life, meanwhile, continued to grow. Hugo and I had reached a point where we no longer just had a chain of stores. Our company had established itself as one of the most recognized in the region for technology sales. We did business with large distributors and had expanded our operations to e-commerce. I had a spacious office, employees who trusted me, and a financial stability that, honestly, I never imagined achieving. Then came the moment that would change everything. One day, I was in the office reviewing job applications for a new expansion we were planning. We needed to fill several positions, from operational to administrative, and I delegated to the human resources team to select the most promising candidates. As I reviewed the files they had filtered, 3 names immediately jumped out at me. It was them, my brothers. My hands literally stopped when I saw their full names on the resumes. I reviewed each document calmly, as if I needed to confirm that it wasn't a misunderstanding. But there was no doubt, it was them. My oldest brother applying for a low-level administrative position, the second one seeking a customer service role, and the third, the athlete, willing to work as a warehouse manager. At that moment, a mix of emotions washed over me. Part of me wanted to laugh. Was this some kind of cosmic joke? How was it possible that after all those years of humiliating me, they were now literally asking to work at the company I had built from scratch? But another part of me was completely serious. This was more than just irony. This was my opportunity. I took the files and called Hugo. I explained to him who they were and what they had meant in my life. As a good friend, Hugo let me make the final decision. "They're your family," he said. "But above all, this is your moment. Do what you think is right." I thought about it for a whole day. I could have rejected their applications immediately and let them continue sinking. I could have used my power to block any job opportunity they tried to get in the city, but that would have been too easy. I wanted something more. I wanted them to feel what I felt. So I offered them the jobs. I didn't tell them that I was the owner, of course. That would have ruined the surprise. Instead, I made sure that the contracts they signed put them in positions where they would have to work hard. Nothing comfortable, nothing privileged. The oldest started as an administrative assistant with a modest salary and basic tasks. The second one attended to customers in a small store, dealing with complaints and returns all day long. And the third one, the athlete of the family, now unloaded boxes and organized inventory in the warehouse. Weeks went by before they even suspected anything. Meanwhile, I watched from the shadows, evaluating their performance. Seeing them work for me without knowing it was like an exercise in poetic justice. Every email I received from their supervisors, every report on their progress, was a reminder of how much the game had changed. The first clue came when my second brother saw me in the main office. He greeted me, somewhat confused, probably thinking I was just another employee, but he didn't ask any questions. Little by little, all three of them began to notice my presence in and then came the day I had been waiting for, the meeting where I would finally reveal the truth. We organized a general meeting with all the employees. It was something we did every quarter, but this time it had a special purpose. When the time came, I went up on stage, took the microphone, and said the words that had been building up inside me for years. Before we begin, I want to officially introduce myself to those who don't know me yet. I am the founder and CEO of this company, and I want to thank you all for being a part of it. The silence in the room was absolute, but the best part was seeing their faces. My brothers were there, sitting in the back, with a mixture of disbelief and horror painted on their faces. They looked at each other as if trying to process what they had just heard. The oldest one even leaned forward as if he wasn't sure he had understood correctly. At that moment, I addressed them directly. Oh, and for some of you who have just joined us recently, I am especially glad to have you here. Welcome to my company. The expression on my brothers' faces was indescribable. They had gone from disbelief to a kind of silent panic. They didn't say anything, but I knew that inside they were reliving all the moments when they had made me feel less than. After that meeting, the dynamic between my brothers and me changed drastically. For years, they had been the ones in control of the conversations, the ones who dictated how I should feel, how I should look, and above all, how I should think about my place in the world. But now they were trapped in a game where I held all the cards, and they knew it. They didn't look for me directly after the meeting, probably trying to process everything, thinking about how to approach me without giving themselves away. On the other hand, I continued my daily routine as if nothing had happened. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of being the one to initiate the conversation. I wanted them to feel the discomfort of every day they spent under my supervision. It wasn't long before problems began to arise. My oldest brother, the one who had always been the leader, seemed to have trouble adjusting to his new role as an administrative assistant. His reports were full of basic errors, and he constantly tried to delegate his responsibilities to other employees, as if he were still in a position of authority. This didn't go unnoticed. I received several complaints from his supervisor, and although I could have protected him, I decided that he should face the consequences. After a month, I called him to my office. I wanted to see how he would react now that he knew who was in control. When he came in, he looked nervous, something I had never seen in him before. This was the same man who years ago didn't bother to hide his contempt for me. Now he was sitting in front of me, looking at the desk instead of my eyes. "Do you know why I called you?" I asked him in a calm but firm tone. "I suppose it has to do with the reports," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "Exactly," I said. I paused to let the silence make him uncomfortable. Then I added, "These kinds of mistakes are unacceptable in our company. Here we are all responsible for our work, and there is no place for those who don't fulfill their duties." He remained silent, but I could see that it was hard for him to swallow his pride. Finally, he looked up and said something I never expected to hear. "I'm sorry, brother. I'm doing the best I can." Brother. That word that had been so scarce in my life now came out of his mouth as if he had never treated me like the pariah of the family. Inside, a part of me wanted to throw him out of the office right then and there, but I didn't. "I hope you improve," I replied with a neutrality that had everything I wanted to say. "We don't make exceptions here, not even for you." My second brother, the Joker, wasn't having a good time either. His job in customer service required him to deal with annoyed people complaining about products or services, something that seemed to get under his skin. One day I learned that he had raised his voice at a customer. I called him into my office too, but this time I was more direct. "What makes you think you can treat customers that way?" I asked, crossing my arms as I stared at him. I lost my patience. "It won't happen again." "You better make sure it doesn't," I replied. "If this happens again, you won't have a place here." His face turned red with shame. This wasn't the same man who used to laugh at me for not having brand-name clothes or for making mistakes on my schoolwork. Now he was being judged by someone he used to consider inferior. The third one, my athlete brother, remained silent, perhaps because he knew that his position as a warehouse manager didn't give him room for error. But I saw how little by little reality hit him. I couldn't help but compare him to the arrogant kid who used to make fun of me when I lost a game or failed at something physical. Now he was just another man, carrying boxes and organizing inventory. Despite all this, I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more. I didn't just want them to work for me. I wanted them to understand what it meant to be in my place. I wanted them to experience, even if just a fraction, the contempt and lack of support I faced for years. So I started to implement small adjustments to their jobs. Nothing directly cruel, but significant enough to make them feel I assigned my oldest brother additional projects that required attention to detail, projects that, if not completed excellently, could jeopardize his position. I increased the second one's customer service shift during difficult hours, when complaints were usually more frequent. And I reduced the third one's breaks, arguing that the warehouse needed more organization due to the increase in demand. They didn't complain directly, but I saw it in their faces, that frustration, that helplessness, that feeling that their efforts didn't matter because the cards were already stacked against them. It was exactly what I had felt throughout my entire childhood. Final update. The time had come to close the cycle. For months, I let my brothers work under my conditions, adapting to a system that didn't give them the comforts they once enjoyed. I saw them strive, fail, swallow their pride, and adapt to roles that, in their minds, should have been beneath them. But the final piece was still missing, the direct confrontation. We organized a special meeting with the three of them. I asked their supervisors to send them a formal summons from Human Resources. The message was clear: mandatory meeting to discuss your performance in the company. I didn't give them any more details, and I knew that ambiguity would fill them with anxiety. On the day of the meeting, I made them wait in the boardroom for 15 minutes, a simple but effective tactic to increase the tension. When I finally entered, all three were sitting on the other side of the table, avoiding my gaze. The oldest was fiddling with a pen, the second was rubbing his hands, and the third was staring at his notepad as if trying to find answers in it. I sat down opposite them, positioning myself in a way that made it clear who was in charge. On the table, I had 3 folders, their complete employment files, with their performance evaluations. "Well, I think it's time to have an honest conversation," I began, looking at them one by one. "The 3 of you have been working here for a while, and I think it's fair that we talk about how you've been performing." Their faces were a mixture of fear and confusion. They probably didn't know if this was a warning, a dismissal, or something worse. I opened the first folder, the oldest one's. "Let's start with you. Your reports have improved, but you still have serious problems with organization. In addition, there are constant complaints that you try to delegate your responsibilities to others. This is not acceptable." The oldest one nodded slowly, biting his lip as if he wanted to defend himself but didn't have the courage to do so. I opened the second folder, the jokers. "Now you. Customer complaints about your attitude have decreased, but you're still not at the level we expect in customer service. The customer is always right, and your patience needs to improve a lot if you want to stay here." He lowered his gaze without saying anything. Finally, I opened the third folder, the athletes. "And you've been consistent, but the evaluations indicate that you tend to avoid tasks that you consider tedious. In a warehouse, everything is tedious. You can't choose what you want to do." The youngest one simply swallowed hard without trying to defend himself. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Then I closed the folders and leaned forward. "Now I want you to understand something important. This is not just any company. This is my company. I built it from scratch, with my own hands, after years of being belittled, humiliated, and treated as if I were worthless." For the first time, they looked up and met my gaze directly. Their expressions were pure bewilderment, mixed with growing guilt. Do you remember how you used to make fun of me for not having enough, for not being like you? I continued, my voice maintaining a firm but controlled tone. Well, now the tables have turned. How does it feel to be on the other side? No one said a word. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment I thought one of them would try to justify themselves. But they didn't. They just sat there, motionless, as if my words had hit them with full force. It was the oldest one who broke the silence. But instead of an apology, what came out of his mouth was an outburst of anger. How dare you talk to us like that? We are your family. You wouldn't be anything without us. His face was red with fury, and he slammed his fist on the table, making the documents I had placed on it tremble. Before I could answer, the athlete also intervened, his tone equally aggressive. That's right. You've always been resentful. I bet you planned all this just to humiliate us. I knew this moment could come. For months I had seen their frustration grow, and now it had finally exploded. But what I didn't expect was what happened next. The oldest one stood up abruptly, crossed the table, and grabbed me by the collar of my shirt. Tell me this isn't revenge, damn you. I tried to stay calm, but before I could push him away, the athlete also stood up and, in a quick movement, pushed my chair backward, causing me to fall to the floor. The second brother, the Joker, stayed in his place, visibly nervous but without intervening. I got up quickly, facing them without backing down. Is this all you have? Violence. Perfect. Show exactly why you will never amount to anything. That was enough to ignite them even further. What followed was a chaotic confrontation. Both of them tried to attack me, but they weren't going to intimidate me. Security personnel arrived quickly and separated them from me. They were both dragged out of the room shouting insults and threats, while the Joker, the only one who had remained in his seat, simply watched in silence. After the incident, I made a firm decision. The two older ones were fired immediately. The Joker, despite his mistakes, had shown some maturity by not joining in the chaos, so I decided to give him another chance, albeit under a strict warning. The other two went back to where they had started, unemployed and without clear prospects. Their names were marked in the industry, and they knew it would be difficult for them to find work after this. I didn't regret it. In the end, I had closed the cycle exactly as I wanted, with them facing the consequences of their actions, and me, finally, at peace. Story 5. My brother is keeping our parents' inheritance because he thinks I don't need it. But the trial revealed that he had forged documents to keep everything. This all started a year ago, when my parents passed away in a car accident. It was a devastating blow. I lost the two most important people in my life from one day to the next, and honestly, I still haven't gotten over it. But, as if grieving wasn't enough, now I'm facing something I never thought would happen. My brother, Diego, stole the inheritance they left us. Let me give you some context. My parents weren't millionaires, but they worked very hard their entire lives to build a solid estate, a couple of properties, a fairly profitable family business, and some saved money. Since we were children, they made it clear that everything would be divided equally between Diego and me. They were always very fair in that regard. Diego is my older brother. He's 35, married, and has two small children. I'm 28, live alone, and have a stable job, although I'm not rich by any means. We've never had a perfect relationship, but we grew up being quite close, at least until he got married. From then on, he started to distance himself, but I thought it was normal. His priority was his family, and I understood that. When my parents died, Diego assumed the role of family leader. Honestly, I was so devastated that I didn't mind letting him take care of all the paperwork. He would say things like, "Don't worry, Mariana, I'll take care of it. It's the least I can do as the oldest." And I trusted him because, well, he's my brother. But a month ago, I started to notice strange things. We had talked about selling one of the properties for the money, but Diego started putting me off. When I asked him directly what was happening with the inheritance, he told me this with the utmost calmness. "Look, Mariana, Mom and Dad decided to leave everything to me. They said you don't need it because you have a good job." Excuse me. I asked to see the will, and he said he had it at his house, but it wasn't necessary for me to see it. According to him, our parents had told him they didn't want me to feel burdened with the responsibility of managing the properties or the business. What's more, he even told me it was for my own good. Obviously, I wasn't satisfied. After insisting several times, he sent me a scan of the will via WhatsApp, but as soon as I saw it, something didn't add up. The document looked strange, as if someone had edited it hastily. Also, I didn't recognize the notary's signature. I tried to stay calm and went to the office of the lawyer who always worked with my parents, an older gentleman who had known our family for years. When I asked him about the changes to the will, he looked at me confused and said, "Changes? As far as I know, your parents never modified their original will." I was stunned. I left the office shaking with rage. All of this is so surreal. I can't believe that Diego, my own brother, is behind this. How could he do something like that? It's not even just about the money. It's the fact that he betrayed our family's trust in this way. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to confront him directly, but another part feels like I can't trust him. Am I overreacting? Should I let it go to avoid more drama? This is consuming me, and I don't even know where to begin to fix this mess. Update 1. A week has passed, and things have escalated more than I imagined. I took a few days to calm down and think about the best way to approach this. I didn't want to confront Diego impulsively because, honestly, I'm still struggling to process that this is coming from him. So I decided to call him to request a face-to-face meeting. I thought if I could sit down with him and talk like adults, we could clear this all up. We met at a cafe near his house. As soon as I arrived, he greeted me with that fake smile he puts on every time he wants to convince you that he has everything under control. He didn't even let me finish ordering a coffee before he started with his speech. "Look, Mariana, I know you're upset, but you have to understand that this was a decision Mom and Dad made thinking about what was best for everyone." I wanted to yell at him not to take me for a fool, but I held back. I calmly told him that I wanted to see the original will, not a blurry scan via WhatsApp, and that I also needed more concrete explanations about when and how they supposedly changed their wishes. Diego sighed as if he were dealing with a capricious child and dropped this gem. "They told me you don't need to worry about this, Mariana. You have a good job. You don't have children or a family to support. I, on the other hand, have to take care of my children and secure their future." Mom and Dad understood that, and that's why they made this decision. I wanted to ask him if he thought my parents had raised a complete idiot, but what I said was, "And how is it that they never told me anything about this? Why didn't they talk to me before making such a significant change?" Diego started evading, saying that they had wanted to spare me the stress and that they had trusted him to handle things in the best way. Every word he said sounded more ridiculous than the last. He wasn't just minimizing my right to the inheritance. He seemed convinced that he was right. When I asked to see the physical will, he said he didn't have it at that moment, that it was stored in a safe place, but not to worry because everything was in order. "You have to trust me, Mariana. This isn't something I did out of selfishness. It's what they wanted." What angered me wasn't just the lie, but the way he spoke, as if he truly believed he was doing the right thing. But I didn't want to show him how upset I was. I told him I would think about it, and we would talk later. That same night, I contacted my parents' lawyer again. I told him everything Diego had said, and his response was exactly what I feared. "Mariana, something here doesn't make sense. Your parents never mentioned making changes to the will. In fact, the last official document they signed establishes an equal division of all assets between you and your brother." I asked him if there was any way to obtain a certified copy of the original will, and he said yes, but we would need to present it to a judge if there were indications that some kind of fraud had been committed. That's when I realized this wasn't just a family dispute. It was something legal and possibly a crime. Now I have a copy of the original will in my hands, and the difference with the document Diego sent me is shocking. Not only did he change the equal division clause, but he even altered the signatures and dates to make it look legitimate. It's as if he completely underestimated my ability to investigate. I haven't spoken to Diego since then because I'm trying to decide what to do. Part of me still can't believe that my brother, the person I grew up with, has stooped so low. But another part of me is furious and feels that this can't be left like this. Update 2. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm in a bad dream that I can't wake up from. After reviewing the original will with my lawyer and confirming that Diego had forged it, I knew I had to act. What I didn't expect was to discover that this whole thing went much deeper than I imagined. I decided not to confront Diego directly yet. Instead, I began to investigate further into how he had managed everything since he took control of the inheritance. I contacted the notary who supposedly signed the new, Well, because I wanted to understand how anyone could have endorsed such an obviously fake document. And well, here comes the bombshell. The notary had no idea what I was talking about. He looked at me as if I had asked him for explanations about a unicorn. He checked his files and confirmed that there was no will signed by my parents after the original one. That's when he told me, "This is a forged document. There's no doubt." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know why I still had a small hope that all of this was a misunderstanding, but there was no turning back. Diego had forged the document from scratch. From there, I decided to dig deeper. I contacted some close relatives, people who knew about the original will and who were present when my parents talked about their wishes. Everyone confirmed the same thing. My parents always said that the inheritance would be divided equally between Diego and me. No one remembered them mentioning any changes. Even one of my aunts, my mom's sister, told me something that chilled me to the bone. Diego already seemed strange to me at the funeral. He was too interested in getting things in order and talked as if everything was already his. That's where everything started to click. While I was devastated by my parents' death, Diego had been making moves. He had used my grief as an opportunity to take everything without me noticing. Finally, I decided to review the financial and notarial records related to the family business. This was difficult because Diego had total control, but I managed to find some suspicious movements. It turns out that, in the months following my parents' death, Diego transferred large sums of money from the business accounts to a personal account. He also sold part of the company's inventory at a much lower price than market value, something that looked like a desperate attempt to get quick cash. Everything points to Diego being in serious financial trouble long before my parents passed away. I'm beginning to believe that his desperation was what led him to do this. But does that justify it to me? No. Now I'm in a dilemma. My lawyer told me that we have enough evidence to file a lawsuit, but doing so means starting an all-out war with Diego. This will completely destroy our relationship, and although right now I feel a lot of anger, I can't help but also feel sadness. This isn't what I wanted. I just wanted things to be fair. However, one thing is clear to me. Diego crossed a line. It's not just about the money. It's the lack of respect towards me, towards our parents, and towards everything they built. I know that filing a lawsuit won't be easy. This won't be resolved overnight, and Diego will probably try to manipulate the situation to paint me as the bad guy. But I can't stand idly by while he takes advantage of our parents' memory to line his own pockets. Update 3. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where, even though you know you're doing the right thing, you feel your heart break a little more with each step you take. That's exactly what I'm going through. I decided to do it. I filed a lawsuit against Diego. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life because I knew that the moment I did it, there would be no turning back. But after everything I discovered, how could I stay silent? How could I allow him to continue getting away with it? This isn't just for me. It's for my parents, for the respect for everything they worked so hard to build. My lawyer helped me prepare the lawsuit. We included all the evidence we gathered, the certified copy of the original will, the forgery analysis, the notary's statements, and the suspicious financial records. When I saw the entire file assembled, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I knew we had a solid case, but sadness because all of this meant that my relationship with Diego was probably broken forever. The lawsuit was formally filed a few days ago, and Diego has already been notified. I guess he was expecting something like this to happen because he didn't call me to discuss it. Instead, I got a message from his wife. "Mariana, how could you do this? Diego only wanted to protect you and make sure you were okay. Now you're destroying our family. Is that what you wanted? Protect me? Destroy his family?" How convenient that she forgot to mention that her husband forged a will, embezzled money from the family business, and basically left me with nothing. I didn't reply because I honestly have nothing to say to her. What did devastate me was when my eldest nephew, Diego's son, called me. He's 7 years old and doesn't understand what's going on, but he asked me, "Why are you mad at my dad? Don't you want to come to the house anymore?" I had to hold back tears so as not to break down at that moment. I told him I loved him very much, that none of this had anything to do with him, and that someday he would understand. But I hung up feeling like the worst person in the world. On the other hand, Diego didn't take long to react. When he finally called me, it wasn't to apologize or try to resolve things civilly. No, he sent me a series of text messages ranging from manipulation attempts to veiled threats. Mariana, you're destroying our family because of your pride. Is it really worth it? If you continue with this, you'll regret it. You don't know who you're messing with. I don't know if he expected to scare me, but if anything, he fueled my determination. I captured all the messages and sent them to my lawyer, who assured me that these could also be used in the case as evidence of his behavior. And then, as if this wasn't enough, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. My lawyer and I managed to access more documents related to the family business. And that's where we found the real reason behind all of this. Diego is up to his neck in debt. It turns out that, for the past few years, while I thought Diego was living a quiet and happy life with his family, he had been making bad financial decisions, bad business deals, loans he couldn't pay back, even gambling. Yes, gambling. All of this had accumulated such a large debt that there was no way he could cover it with his salary or savings. And guess what? The suspicious financial movements I found before, the money transfers and the sale of the business inventory, weren't just an attempt to get quick cash. They were to pay off urgent debts. And not just any debts, but with lenders who, according to my lawyer, don't seem like the type to accept an "I'm sorry" as an answer. That's when it all started to make sense. Diego didn't forge the will just out of greed or because he wanted to secure his children's future. He did it because he was desperate, because he knew there was no other way to get out of the hole he had dug himself into. But here's the part that hurts me the most. Instead of coming to me and telling me the truth, asking for help, or at least explaining the situation to me, he decided to betray me. He decided to use our family's pain as an opportunity to save himself at my expense. Now, with this new information, my lawyer is preparing an even stronger strategy for the trial. Forging the will was already a serious crime, but now we can prove that Diego acted with intent to defraud and embezzle family assets. This not only increases the chances of me recovering what belongs to me, but could also get Diego into much more serious legal trouble. Of course, he doesn't know I have this information yet. I'm playing my cards carefully because I know that as soon as he finds out, he'll try to counterattack. But I can't help but feel a knot in my stomach every time I think about what's coming. The trial is getting closer and closer, and although I'm determined to keep going, I can't deny that it weighs on me. I'm fighting for what's right, but the idea of destroying my brother, even though he caused this, still hurts me. However, every time I doubt, I remember what I discovered. The lies, the manipulations, the debts, and above all, the contempt with which he decided to betray not only me, but the memory of our parents. Diego got himself into this mess alone, and now he'll have to face the consequences. Final update. I don't even know where to begin, because what I discovered surpasses anything I could have imagined. For months, I've been fighting for justice, to recover what my parents left behind, and to expose Diego's betrayal. But what no one prepared me for was facing the truth that everything I believed about my family, my brother, and even my own life was a lie. The trial finally arrived. It was a long and grueling process, but when I entered that courtroom, I felt like I had the upper hand. My lawyer presented the evidence of the forged will, the financial records, and even Diego's messages. The judge listened attentively, and Diego couldn't stop fidgeting in his seat, as if every word were a knife. When it was his turn to speak, his lawyer tried to discredit me, saying that I was only doing this for money, that I was obsessed with destroying my brother. But the evidence was too solid, and everyone in the room knew it. At that moment, I thought the worst was over. But then something happened that changed everything. The judge asked to review the documentation of the forged will and, as part of the procedure, requested a complete expert analysis of the signatures and seals. It was standard procedure, but what they found was anything but. The experts stated that not only had my parents' signatures been forged, but Diego's birth certificate also seemed to have irregularities. This raised a red flag, and the judge ordered a deeper investigation. I confess that at that moment, I didn't fully understand what was happening. I thought it was just a technical error. But then my lawyer told me something that chilled me to the bone. Mariana, I think there are inconsistencies in your brother's birth records. This could be bigger than we thought. What followed was like ripping a bandage off a wound I didn't even know I had. During the investigation, it came to light that Diego was not my parents' biological son. He had actually been secretly adopted when he was just a few months old. My parents never told me, probably because they didn't want it to affect our relationship as siblings. And honestly, I never cared. Diego had always been my brother, period. But what broke my heart was discovering that Diego had known all along. According to the documents we found, he learned about the adoption years ago, when he had to process certain legal paperwork. Instead of seeing it as an act of love from my parents, he used it as justification to betray our family. Diego knew he had no legal right to the inheritance because my parents never fully formalized his adoption. That meant that, legally speaking, he wasn't their direct heir. That's why he forged the will. He knew that if he didn't, he would be left empty-handed. When this came to light at the trial, Diego completely lost his composure. He stood up and started yelling, saying that all of this was my parents' fault, that they had used him his whole life, and that he was only claiming what he deserved. I was the one who was always there for them. I deserved everything. Not you. I don't know if it was the shock or the rage, but at that moment, I realized something. Diego had never seen me as his sister. To him, I was always an obstacle, someone who stood in the way of what he believed belonged to him. The judge didn't take long to make his decision. He declared the forged will invalid and the original one, which divided everything equally between us, to be the only valid one. But, due to the lack of a complete legal bond between Diego and my parents, the entire inheritance belonged solely to me. Diego lost everything. Not just the money and assets, but also the image he had built as the self-sacrificing brother. Now everyone knew what he had done, and his reputation was in ruins. Leaving the courtroom, I thought I would feel relieved. But what I felt was an enormous emptiness. Diego had stolen much more than money from me. He stole my trust, the happy memories, and the idea that we were a family. He tried to talk to me outside the courtroom, but the only thing I said to him was, "It wasn't about the money, Diego. It was because you betrayed everything our family stood for. And I hope someday you understand the damage you've done." After that, he left, and I haven't seen him again. I know he's facing other lawsuits for the debts he accumulated, and he'll probably never be able to get his life back. As for me, I've been trying to pick up the pieces. It still hurts to think about what happened, but I'm also realizing something important. You can't choose your biological family, but you can choose the people you want close to you. And Diego, biological or not, no longer has a place in my life. My parents deserved better than this, but I hope that wherever they are, they know that I did my best to honor their memory. And although this wasn't the victory I imagined, it was a victory in the end. Story 6. My father is forcing me to sell my house to help him with his financial problems, but then I discover that he was planning to buy a property in his mistress's name. I'm 29 years old, and 3 years ago I bought my first house. It was one of the biggest accomplishments of my life, especially because I grew up in a family where money was always a problem. My father, in particular, has a very complicated relationship with money, to put it mildly. He's one of those people who has always spent more than he has, justifying himself with phrases like, "Life is short," or "money comes and goes." But of course, when things got complicated, it was always everyone else's responsibility to bail him out. My mother put up with it for years, until they finally divorced a decade ago. I was a teenager at the time, and although I understood that the separation was for the best, my father always made sure to make my sister and me feel guilty for abandoning him. Despite all this, I stayed in contact with him. For some reason, I've always felt this pressure to do the right thing and help him when he needs it. But what just happened? I don't know. I feel like he crossed a line there's no coming back from. A few weeks ago, my father came to see me, visibly distressed. He told me he was in a very serious financial crisis, that he was going to lose everything: his house, his car, even his savings. He begged me to help him. At first, I thought he wanted a loan or something, but no. What he asked me to do was sell my house. Yes, my house. The house that cost me years of work, sacrifices, savings, and giving up a lot of things. He told me that I was in a better position and that, as his son, it was my duty to help him, that family always supports each other. He painted such a dark and desperate picture that, I admit, I started to feel guilty. He talked for hours about how he always made sacrifices for me, although, honestly, I remember more absences than sacrifices, about how he never let me lack anything, which is debatable, and about how, if the roles were reversed, he would do the same for me, which I don't believe for a second. In the end, I agreed. It wasn't an easy decision. The house is more than bricks and mortar to me. It represents my independence, my effort, everything I achieved on my own, without depending on anyone. But he's my father. How could I say no? Now I'm in the process of selling it. The paperwork is already underway, and I can't help but feel this tightness in my chest, as if I'm making a terrible mistake. There's something about all this that doesn't add up, but I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's just my paranoia or my emotional attachment to the house. Update 1. Since I agreed to sell the house, I feel like I'm on autopilot. Everything is moving too fast, as if someone is pushing me to make decisions without giving me time to think. The buyer is already decided, the terms of sale are on the table, and the notary is scheduled for next week. My father, for his part, keeps pressuring me. He calls me several times a day to make sure everything is on track. He uses a tone that tries to be kind, but there's an urgency in his voice that makes me nervous. He insists that I must close this deal as soon as possible, because, according to him, every day that passes is more dangerous for his financial stability. And this is where things start to smell fishy. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like there's something he's not telling me. For example, a couple of days ago, he asked me not to mention any of this to my sister or any other family member. He said they don't need to be involved, and that this is between us. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now I can't stop thinking about how strange it sounds. Also, I found something strange. You see, a few days ago, my father left his phone on the table while he went to the bathroom, and I got a message notification. I'm not one to snoop on other people's phones, but something urged me to look, and that's when I saw the name, Love. It wasn't my mother, of course, because they've been divorced for years, and as far as I knew, he wasn't seeing anyone. The message said something like, "Don't worry, honey, everything is going according to plan. Soon we'll have what we need. It's almost all set." I'm not going to lie, my heart skipped a beat. What the hell does that mean? What are they? I tried to unlock the phone, but it had a password, so I couldn't read more. Since then, that phrase keeps going around in my head. I decided to ask him indirectly if he was seeing someone. I casually commented on whether he had met anyone special lately, and he just laughed and brushed it off, saying something like, "At my age, those things don't matter anymore." I don't know if I'm becoming paranoid, but his reaction didn't convince me at all. Another detail that bothers me is how he's handling all the money. He asked me to transfer a portion directly to his bank account when I received the payment for the sale. He said it was more efficient to do it that way to pay off his debts immediately. He didn't give me many details, just mentioned a few bills and a personal loan that, according to him, is about to explode. But when I asked to see the documents or some bank statement to better understand the situation, he got upset. He told me not to distrust him and not to interfere with his logistics. I'm starting to feel that this is not just a financial crisis. There are too many loose ends, too many things that don't add up. I don't know if I'm being naive by going ahead with this, or if I'm seeing ghosts where there aren't any. Update 2. I've spent the last few days sunk in a mix of anxiety, rage, and sadness. I don't know how to process what I just discovered, but if one thing is clear to me, it's that my father hasn't just manipulated me, he's betrayed me in a way I never would have imagined. I need to put all this in writing because, honestly, I'm losing my mind trying to piece together this mess. After my last post, I decided I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was terribly wrong, and that feeling that there was more at stake than my father was saying was impossible to ignore. So, following the advice of some comments, I started investigating. First, I went straight to the issue of the alleged debts. My father kept insisting that he needed the money to save his house and pay off a loan that, according to him, was about to sink him. Up to that point, I had accepted his version because, well, he's my father. But after so much insistence to see proof, and his constant evasiveness, I realized that I had never seen a single bill, letter from the bank, or document confirming what he was saying. So I went directly to the source. I contacted the bank where my father supposedly had this huge debt. At first, they told me they couldn't give me details because I'm not the account holder, but I insisted, arguing that I was selling my property to help him, and I needed some proof to justify the transfer. After a lot of pressure, they told me something that made my blood run cold. There is no loan in his name. Nothing. No accumulated debts, no risk of foreclosure. Nothing he had told me was true. At that moment, my head was spinning. Why would he lie about something like that? Why drag me into selling my house with such urgency if there were no real debts? I couldn't understand it, but I knew I couldn't stop digging. The next thing was his phone. I knew that notification I had seen before was key. So I waited for him to leave it unattended again. It wasn't easy because, since I started asking more direct questions, he's become much more careful. Finally, I managed to get him to leave it on the table while he was talking to a neighbor outside. I quickly grabbed his phone, and this time I was lucky. I unlocked it using his birth date. Yes, too obvious. I can't describe what I felt when I read those messages. There was a whole conversation with someone saved as love, and it was clear that this person not only knew about my existence, but also about the sale of the house. In the messages, my father was saying things like, "The money will be ready next week. Just be patient, and soon we'll be able to buy the house you've always wanted. It's almost all set." Further down, there were messages from her replying things like, "I'm tired of waiting. You said this would be quick." And the worst, one that said, "I hope it's worth the drama with your son. I don't want this to end badly." My father was using the money from the sale of my house to buy a property for his mistress. I had to put the phone down because I felt like I was going to throw up. I locked myself in my room and started putting all the pieces together. The urgency, the secrecy, the evasiveness. It all made sense now. It wasn't about saving his house or any financial crisis. He simply wanted to indulge a woman I don't even know. The rage I felt at that moment was like an explosion. I couldn't believe that my own father, the person who is supposed to protect me, care for me, and support me, would be willing to betray me like this. And the worst part is that he justifies it. In the messages, there were phrases like, "My son can recover, he's young. I don't have much time left. And it's just a house. I don't know why he's making such a fuss. I haven't confronted him yet. I can't. I need to think of a plan, because if one thing is clear to me, it's that this isn't going to stay like this. I'm not going to let him take everything from me for a lie. And on top of that, use my sacrifice to benefit someone who doesn't even belong to our family. I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to turn this around. For now, I've already contacted a lawyer. I want to know if there's anything I can do to stop the sale, or at least block my father's access to the money. I don't know if it will be possible, because technically I agreed voluntarily, but I feel like I have to try. I'm also gathering all the evidence, screenshots of the messages, bank records, everything that can be used to expose him. Update 3. I couldn't take it anymore. After everything I discovered, every time I saw my father or heard his voice, it was like rage was consuming me from the inside. I was so hurt and enraged that even breathing near him felt like a challenge. So I decided to confront him. I couldn't keep acting like nothing was happening, not after knowing what he was doing behind my back. I planned how I was going to do it. I wanted to stay calm, but at the same time expose everything I knew so he couldn't deny it or manipulate me. I chose a time when we were alone in my house, although now that I think about it, saying my house is starting to feel empty because I don't even know if it will be mine for much longer. I started directly. I didn't beat around the bush or give him room to try to evade me. I told him that I knew there was no debt, that I had contacted the bank, and they confirmed that there were no outstanding loans. His face changed in an instant. First, he tried to feign surprise, but then he went on the defensive. He snapped at me. "Why did you get involved in that? Who gave you permission to pry into my things?" At that moment, I took out the screenshots of the messages. I wanted him to understand that I knew everything, absolutely everything. I showed him the conversations with his mistress, the plan to use my money, and the house he was planning to buy for that woman. He had no way to deny it. And still, he tried. "You're taking things out of context," was the first thing he said. He crossed his arms and tried to act like none of it mattered. But when I insisted, when I told him to stop lying to me because I had all the proof, he finally exploded. What came next was a barrage of justifications and manipulations that left me with a knot in my stomach. He told me that I didn't understand what it was like to struggle all my life only to have an ungrateful son throw it in my face, that I wouldn't be anything without him, that everything I have is thanks to the sacrifices he made for me. He even went so far as to say that selling my house was the least I could do for him after everything he had done for me while I was growing up. When I asked him how he could justify betraying me like that, using my hard work to buy a house for his mistress, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Because I deserve it. I've worked all my life, and now it's my turn to enjoy. You're young, you can buy another house. I don't have time to start over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There wasn't an ounce of regret in his words, not even a feigned apology. It was all justification after justification. He made me feel like I was the selfish one for daring to question him. And then, as if that weren't enough, he threw what he must have thought was the final blow. And besides, you're my son. What kind of son refuses to help his own father? You owe me everything. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be where you are now. Those words broke me. Not because they were true, because they're not, but because they reflect exactly how he has seen me all my life. As a tool, a resource he can use whenever it suits him. I was never a son, not really. To him, I was always an extension of his wants and needs, someone who was obligated to fix his life. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't. I told him everything, that I couldn't trust him anymore, that this was the biggest betrayal I had suffered in my life, and that I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He laughed. Yes, he laughed in my face. He told me that I couldn't do anything, that I had already signed the sale papers, and that the money, as soon as it arrived, would be his to do with as he pleased. When I mentioned that I had contacted a lawyer and that I was willing to fight, he changed his tone. He became even more aggressive. He accused me of being disloyal, of trying to humiliate him, of being just like my mother. He said that if I continued down that path, he would never speak to me again, as if that were a punishment. Finally, he left my house, slamming the door, saying that I would regret what I was doing. When I closed the door, I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or break something. I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt humiliated. It's hard to explain how much it hurts to realize that someone who should love you unconditionally is capable of destroying you without a second thought. Right now, I'm more determined than ever to take action. I don't know if I'll be able to get my house back, but if one thing is clear to me, it's that I'm not going to let this man use my hard work for his own benefit. He's not my father anymore. He's a stranger. And this stranger is going to find out that he can't play with my life without consequences. I'm working with my lawyer to analyze our options. I know it won't be easy, but I'm not going to give up. If the system doesn't help me, I'll find another way. My only certainty right now is that I'm not going to let him get away with it. Update 4. After confronting my father and confirming that he doesn't feel even the slightest remorse for what he's doing, I knew I couldn't just stay angry. I can't deny that that confrontation destroyed me emotionally, but it also ignited something in me, a cold, calculating determination that I had never felt before. He underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. If he thought I was going to stand idly by while he destroys what I've built, he clearly doesn't know me as well as he thinks. The first thing I did was continue working with my lawyer. The situation isn't simple, because technically I've already signed the sale papers, and I'm in the final stage of the process. However, my lawyer explained to me that, under certain circumstances, it is possible to annul a sale if it can be proven that there was coercion or deceit. Although it's a complicated and not guaranteed path, I don't want to go into too many legal technicalities here, but we're basically building a case based on the evidence I gathered, especially the messages between my father and his mistress, which show that this whole sale was based on a deliberate lie. Meanwhile, I started taking action on other fronts. My sister, whom my father tried to keep out of this, now knows the whole truth. I had hesitated to tell her because I didn't want to involve her in the chaos, but I needed someone I could trust and who could support me emotionally. When I showed her the messages and explained what was happening, her reaction was pure indignation. It turns out that she also has a history of problems with my father, especially because he has always tried to manipulate us in different ways. What I didn't expect was that she also had information that would change everything. My sister told me that a few months ago, my father asked her for a large loan. At the time, he didn't tell her exactly what he needed it for, but now, with everything we know, it's obvious that he had the same goal in mind, to use his own children to fulfill his mistress's whims. Fortunately, she refused, because she had already learned not to trust him after years of disappointments. But this confirms that I wasn't his only plan. I was simply the one who fell into his trap. The next thing was to gather as much information as possible about this woman, his mistress. I didn't know much about her, but the messages I found on my father's phone gave me some clues. They mentioned a particular address. So I decided to investigate. To my surprise, I discovered that this woman already has a house, but not in the best condition. It seems that what she really wants is a bigger property, something more luxurious. Now I understand why my father was so desperate to use my money. He wanted to impress her, probably to feel important. This is where things get interesting. Through social media, because yes, I became a bit of a detective in this process. I found this woman's profile and some of her close circles. I discovered that she has a fairly active social life, and she's not exactly discreet with what she posts. In one of her most recent photos, she appears with my father at an expensive restaurant, celebrating a new beginning. This was posted just a few days ago, while I'm here trying to save what's left of my life. The lack of shame is simply astounding. Also, in one of her comments, someone asked her about the new beginning, and she replied something that made my blood run cold. Soon we'll be living like I've always dreamed. Everything is worth it if you know how to play your cards right. That phrase was confirmation that she knows exactly what she's doing and has no qualms about taking advantage of my father and, by extension, me. I decided to use this to my advantage. If she's so comfortable showing everything on social media, maybe I can find something that weakens her position or even gives me an edge. I'm also considering how to expose all of this publicly if necessary. I've already spoken to my lawyer about the possibility of using these posts as evidence if we go to trial. And although it's not 100% solid, it definitely adds to the case. On the other hand, I did something my father would probably never expect. I contacted some of his close friends. Not to ask for help, because I know they couldn't offer it, but so they would know what's going on. For years, he has built an image of himself as a sacrificing father to them, and I knew that if they discovered the truth, that house of cards would begin to crumble. I told them everything, how he manipulated me, how he's using the money from the house, and what his real plan is with this woman. Their reaction was a mix of surprise and disgust. One of them even confessed to me that my father had asked him for money a few weeks ago, using the same story that he was on the verge of bankruptcy. I don't know what impact this will have in the long run, but at least I know that he will no longer be able to use everyone around him for his own benefit without being questioned. I'm eroding the web of lies in which he feels so comfortable. Right now, I'm playing a waiting game. The legal process is underway, but I'm also working on something else. I want both my father and his mistress to feel the full weight of what they've done. I'm not just going to try to get my house back. I want them to realize that underestimating me was their biggest mistake. If all goes as I hope, I'm going to make sure that neither of them gets away with this without consequences. Final update. Weeks have passed since my last update, and I must say that these weeks have been the most exhausting and emotionally intense of my life. However, now I can sit down and write this with a sense of satisfaction that I never thought I would feel. Everything that happened changed me profoundly, but I can say with certainty that my father and his mistress got exactly what they deserved. First, let me update you on the legal process. My lawyer turned out to be a true genius. Although I was on the verge of losing hope, he found a strategy that changed the whole picture. We filed a formal request to stop the transfer of the money, arguing that the sale of my house was the product of coercion and deceit. We used my father's messages as the main evidence, demonstrating that his intention was never to help with debts, because they didn't exist, but to appropriate the money for personal gain. We also included evidence of how he emotionally pressured me, using our father-son/daughter relationship to manipulate me. The process was tedious. We had to present everything before a judge and wait for a hearing to decide if there was enough evidence to freeze the transfer of the money. During that time, my father kept trying to contact me, but I didn't respond anymore. I received all kinds of messages, from supposed apologies to veiled threats. He went from saying things like, "We can fix this as a family," to "If you continue down this path, you'll regret it." It was clear that he was desperate because he knew his whole plan was falling apart. The day of the hearing arrived, and although I was nervous, I was also prepared. My lawyer presented the case impeccably, and when it was my father's turn, his attempts to justify what he had done were pathetic. He tried to say that it was all a misunderstanding, and that, as my father, he had the right to ask for my help. But when the judge asked him to explain why he never mentioned the non-existence of debts, and why there were compromising messages talking about buying a house for his mistress, he simply stammered incoherently. It was evident that he had no defense. The judge ruled in my favor. He ordered that the funds from the sale be frozen and that a process be initiated to reverse the transaction. Although I couldn't claim victory yet, my house was still at stake. At least now I had a chance to get it back. While this was happening, I continued working on my plan to confront not only my father, but also his mistress. If they thought they were going to get away with it, they were very wrong. Thanks to everything I investigated about her, I discovered something very interesting. She has a history of legal problems related to fraud and tax evasion. I couldn't believe my luck in finding this, but I decided to use it strategically. I contacted one of my father's friends, who by then was completely on the side of exposing him. This friend, who is an accountant, helped me file an anonymous complaint against her with the tax authorities. I don't know the details of what they found, but I know that a few days later she received a surprise visit from the tax office. This, combined with the loss of the money she expected to receive from my father, left her in a rather complicated position. I heard that she had to sell some of her belongings to cover her legal problems. Karma at its finest. On the other hand, my father was losing control. When he realized that he wouldn't be able to access the money from the sale, he started burning the few bridges he had left. He even tried to ask my sister for help, who, of course, told him to go to hell after everything I told her. He lost credibility among his friends, many of whom now know the kind of person he is. No one wanted to lend him money or help him after discovering how he tried to use me. Finally, the reversal of the sale of my house was completed. I got my property back, and with it, a part of my peace of mind. I had never felt such relief as the day I signed the papers that annulled the transaction. It's hard to describe what it means to see something you thought was lost returned to your hands. As for my father, he's completely alone now. His mistress left him as soon as she realized there would be no money or new house. I heard, thanks to one of the mutual friends who still keeps in touch with me, that she told him something like, "I don't have time for losers." Ironically, that's exactly what I thought about him. He lives in the same house that he was supposedly going to lose, but now without the support of either of his children or his closest friends. His reputation is ruined, and I highly doubt anyone will ever trust him again. And I'm rebuilding my life little by little. This experience left me scarred, but it also made me stronger and more aware of who deserves my trust and who doesn't. I no longer see my father as a father. I see him as someone who didn't know how to value his family and who paid the price for it. He underestimated me. I'm not as weak as he thought. And that, at the end of the day, is the biggest victory of all.